our city and in our state. This Friday is the start of the Living Traditions Festival. They're celebrating 34 years. So it's a big deal that we have happening here at City Hall grounds. And I wanted to thank the Salt Lake Arts Council for for supporting diversity in our city and fostering all of these different cultures and countries that are represented in that festival. By the way, there are over 90 cultures and over 25 countries that will be participating at the food hall this year. So thank you so much to the Salt Lake Arts Council.
Thank you, Councilmember Valdemoros. We appreciate the information on that and look forward to an exciting weekend here in Washington Square. The first item on our agenda is an ordinance regarding housing zoning map amendment at 1805 South Main Street for the Alliance House. Brian Fulmer from council staff, who's our policy analyst, will introduce this item. And David Gellner is here as the principal planner. So, hey.
Good afternoon. We're also joined by Molly Robinson, the planning manager. So on the screen, you can see the parcel outlined in red. That's the 1805 South Main Street property. It is owned by Alliance House, which is an organization that serves adults with mental illness issues. And the motel that is on the property is being used as multifamily housing for Alliance House members. The motel is in poor condition, and the applicant, which is the Alliance House, would like to construct a new multifamily building on the property, but under the current zoning, which is Business Park, or BP, housing is not allowed. The motel is being operated as a non-conforming use, and they are proposing changing the zoning to Corridor Commercial, or CC. And with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Okay, thank you, Brian. As Brian pointed out, it's a single parcel. It's a little over a quarter acre. It is currently zoned BP, and it's just to the north of the O.C. Tanner property. Because it's a non-conforming use, they have that motel. They can keep using it as housing, but it is, according to them, in poor condition, repair. The zoning doesn't support multifamily housing, so they're looking to change that zoning to build a new apartment on the site. And the master plan calls for community commercial in that area. Corridor commercial, there is no zoning designation called community commercial, but when you look at the description for corridor commercial, which calls for commercial and residential along kind of main streets with some integration into neighborhoods, it's very similar to the corridor commercial, the community commercial description in the master plan. So staff looked at a number of this, looking at the neighborhood and citywide master plan considerations, also that zoning compatibility with adjacent properties, and also looked at alternative zoning districts that could possibly be instead of the CC zoning. Where the property is located now, it's in the South Street Corridor Overlay District, and being zoned BP within that overlay, it actually allows 90 feet in height by right. The zone they're proposing to change to CC would be limited to 30 feet in height or 45 feet through what was called the conditional building and site design review process, thankfully shortened to design review process now. So they are going to a much less intense zone. And if they were to not use the property in the future just for housing, it wouldn't preclude some commercial uses and things on the property, which is why we weren't recommending one of our multifamily zones, which then would just lock it into a housing-only kind of zone.
So it's staff's opinion then that the recommended change to CC accomplishes what you were concerned about, where you'd remove commercial from that area, but at the same time, giving the flexibility for them to redevelop that site the way that they want to do it.
Correct. It would allow commercial use in the future if they chose to do so, but it also allows the multifamily housing.
Okay. Any questions about this application? Councilmember Mendenhall.
This is, as stated, in District 5. Mr. Chair, are you Do you know Alliance House? I imagine you do.
Yeah.
You work with them. They're an incredible
Yep.
organization doing something so unique in this area. They're really a benefit to the community and this neighborhood in particular. And I'm supportive of this application.
Okay. Councilmember Johnston?
I agree. I like the fact that it conforms to the CC neighborhood next door to it. It just plays it in buffers with OC Tanner. I think it's all. Is it all OC Tanner to the south of it?
There
Pretty
is
close.
one small parcel here which just to the south of
Right.
it that contains some other office buildings and things like that.
So I like the zoning piece. Apart from the zoning, I agree. The Alliance House housing there is unique and is hard to replicate elsewhere. So I appreciate the effort to try and upgrade it. So I'm in support of it.
We do have a representative from Alliance House here as well.
Okay. Would the applicant like to speak? No? Great. Okay. Any other questions, comments from the council? No, sir. All right. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We will. Let's see.
It's on the consent agenda
It is
next
on the
week.
consent to set the date.
Yes, and then the public hearing July 9th and potential action July 16th.
Great. And does that, so the Alliance House representative, does that time frame work with what your plans are? The time frame to have for tentative council action on July 16th, the public hearing would be on July 9th. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Brian, David, Molly, thank you for your presentation. Next item is an ordinance regarding a text amendment to allow self-storage units in the D1 zoning district. Nick Tarbett from the council office is going to introduce this. Wayne Mills from the planning department, as well as Doug Danzy, will be here for this presentation as well. Nick?
So this is a pretty short one. I'll let Doug do most of the talking, but as you said, it's a text change that would allow self-storage facilities in the D1 Central Business District, but they would have to be below ground. They would not be allowed above ground. So Doug that pretty much covers it probably.
Yeah, this was a pretty non-controversial item when it went through the planning commissions. Basically, to allow commercial self-storage in basements of buildings in the D1. The D1 is what you can see on the map. It's downtown. People already store things in their basement in these districts. It's a matter of whether they can do it commercially. The petitioner owns the building at 324 South State, and it used to have a health club in their basement, and they're looking at convert it to storage. Part of the rationale is as more people move downtown, they downsize their homes, they have things to store, businesses are here, they have off-site storage, and what we're seeing is dedicated buildings sort of popping up on the periphery of downtown, and part of the logic is storing it in the basement actually has less impact on the activity levels on the sidewalk than an exclusive storage building on the sides of your downtown. So it seemed like a pretty normal fit. There was a discussion, do we do it conditional or permitted? A conditional use by state law is pretty much permitted use as long as you can mitigate any impacts. And part of the thinking was if it's in the basement, there's not a lot of impacts to be mitigated. So rather than create an extra blanket of approval, the recommendation is permitted as long as it's in the basement only, with the exception of leasing offices and public spaces.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I wondered if the fire department had any concerns or interest in this application.
Not that was specifically expressed to me, no. We did route it to building services and fire and there wasn't anything flagged that had an issue.
Okay.
I have a question. So Doug, did anybody come forward, like from the community, in support or against it, or other people that are saying this is a great idea, I do this already, this is a great business opportunity?
I
I
It was 6
wasn't-
months ago, so I don't remember everything, but I think we only had one community member came forward in support, and there was really no significant opposition or no controversy really at all.
Okay, other questions about storage downtown? Councilmember Rogers.
Is there any requirement for sprinkling or anything like that?
That would just, not as part of the zoning, that would come under normal building codes, which sort of gets back to the fire department
Yeah.
stuff. It's storing flammable materials. That kind of thing goes beyond zoning, and it's just regular building code safety issues.
Great. Other questions, comments?
This is a great example of Salt Lake City being dynamic, looking at our existing building stock and figuring out how to do it better. Good job, guys. I think this makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the looking at the building uses that are happening outside of the downtown core, and I think that there's better uses for those spaces. So thanks.
So pat yourselves on the back. So good work on this. And thank you all very much. Okay, item number 3, fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. The administration's overview. Mary Beth Thompson, our Chief Financial Officer, will join us, as well as John Vike, our City Budget Director. Mary Beth and John, will anyone else be joining you at the table? Sorry? Okay, Lisa. Okay.
I'm going to run the budget. I'm going to run the presentations because it's the tough job. Yes, there's a second presentation.
Is there a separate one?
Yes, there's 2 presentations. I've got them. So John's going to speak about the budget overview first, and then Lisa will go into the revenues, which are revenues for the current fiscal year as well as revenues for next fiscal year.
Did you combine those two?
Separate.
Okay. So we can do the budget first and then the revenues? Okay.
All right. Thank you for letting us come. The budget is obviously a big deal, and we're grateful for the opportunity to come and present. We're grateful that we have the opportunity to be here, but we want to recognize that this is the culmination of a lot of people's work, not just simply the three of us that you see sitting here. We want to recognize each of them and the hard work and dedication that they've put in, and thank them for their service as well. So as we begin the budget today, just want to start by showing a slide that shows the entire city budget. This includes all of the different funds and across all of those different things. And the total budget for FY 2020 is at $1.94 billion. That's an increase of nearly $662 million, or 51%. The majority of the increase, again, is associated with the terminal redevelopment project at the airport. That's expected to increase by about $560 million. Public utilities also saw a significant increase. It's up $63.8 million, and that's associated with CIP projects that they are going to begin. The general fund specifically increased by $28.7 million, and this increase was made up of additional 3 months of the new sales tax at about $9.5 million, the quarter-cent sales tax at $4.7 million, and then reimbursements from the airport due to the transfer of the police and some additional positions of $8.6 million. We also recognized about $2.6 million in new growth for this coming fiscal year. Revenues.
Onto that, okay. So this is an overview of just the revenue portion of the budget. For this year, as John mentioned, our general fund budget increased by about $28 million, or 9.5%. The budget includes a judgment levy and increases in real property tax new growth by about $2.6 billion. And the mayor's also recommending a property tax stabilization of $1 million. The sales and use tax is increasing by about $11 million, and As John mentioned, part of that is a recognition of the full year of the Funding Our Future sales tax. We'll have 12 months instead of the 9 that we budgeted for last year. So that's an increase of $9,542,000. The city continues to see positive economic growth and a general trend of increase in sales tax. There's also a $4.7 million increase from the county option sales tax, which is specifically for transit projects. The city is budgeting some major increases for building permits, totaling about $2.3 million, as construction is really on the rise. And there is one negative change to that, which is in our parking permits, which have, we're seeing a reduction of $565,000 in that area. Interest income is up about $1.6 million. We've seen a really great return on our pooled investments. Also, we budgeted for some pretty major decreases. We're seeing a decrease in franchise tax of about $1,062,000. Or $1,062,000. This is a nationwide trend, and we're hoping that we can focus in on that in next year's legislative session. There's also been a decrease in parking tickets that we're reflecting here of about $2.5 million. Part of that is from lower than anticipated ticket issuing, but also a legislative change in the parking fee late structure. So we're trying to recognize the effect that that's going to have on our parking ticket revenue. We have proposed 2 related changes that we hope will offset some of that. One is an increase to the parking meter rate of 50 cents per hour. That should generate an additional $786,000 in parking meter revenue. The other change is an increase in the base fine of parking citations. The average parking citation will increase about $20, and the late fee structure, I actually have a slide for that if you want to show that, but the late fee structure changes from $40 every 10 days to just a 25% late fee at 30 days. One of the other notable changes...
Can we go back to the parking real
sorry.
quick? So just on that, how much of an increase is that from what we're currently charging?
So these are your currents here in this parking fine changes?
So that top shows our top 4 citations. Sorry, it's a little small. The most issued citation is for registration violations. It's currently $30. That fine would go up to $45. And what happens now is that every 10 days there's a $40 late fee. So your citation increases by $120 over that 30 days. At 41 days, we charge a collection fee. So it can max out at about $200 under our current structure. So the new structure would raise that fine to $45.
Yeah, thank you.
With a late fee of, I think it's, what is it, $11? Yeah, a late fee of $11 at 30 days. We received complaints in the past, why don't you treat this like a regular bill and charge me late penalties after 30 days? So we're kind of following that idea and just waiting till 30 days to charge that late fee. 25% is the max we can charge based on the new legislation.
Okay.
And then collection fee at 40 days. What's it max out to if you? So
and as far as the hourly increase, you're also doing an hourly charge increase?
That's, yeah, for parking meters.
For parking meters?
Yeah, 50 cents an hour. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And right now it's what?
It's $2, so it would go up to $2.50.
And you can see this last change part. This is the difference between what our parking tickets currently are charged at and what they would be charged at these new proposals.
Okay. Okay. Was there any sort of community outreach, any discussion with business owners about this change?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Because, I mean, that's a pretty big jump to not have any discussion. Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions on parking? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Off of your question, Mr. Chair, in the past when we've made a significant adjustment or proposed a significant adjustment to those fines or fees, has there been public communication?
Not to my knowledge, there hasn't been.
Well, we haven't really adjusted it since we did the first parking deal, 8 years ago,
Yeah,
7 years ago?
2010, I believe, is when we implemented the pay stations.
And there was a lot of public engagement at that time. And this is a 50-cent increase on $2 an hour, which is a pretty substantial change to not have had any sort of outreach. So I would say, yes, we have had outreach in the past when we've done this.
All right. We'll go a little bit more in depth into the expense side. This slide shows a breakdown of the expenses in two different ways. It shows a breakdown between the departments on the left, and then on the right it shows a breakdown between our costs by cost type. On the right, you can see that we are certainly a customer service organization. Over 50% of our costs, about 60% of our costs are related to personnel costs associated with the people that we have. These costs are strictly within the general fund. So, as we look at the general fund, we'll go over some of our major expense changes. Salary and benefit changes for personnel costs increased by $5.6 million. There was also $8.6 million in personnel and other related costs that are associated with airport positions. So that's the 68 police officers, and then there are 3 additional firefighters and 1 attorney in the city attorney's office. So each of those expenses are now offset by a revenue that comes into the city from the airport as a transfer. Within the mayor's budget, there are 43 additional positions without those 4 that are being paid for by the airport. So the other 43 positions are a change of $3.2 million. Some other large increases that we thought would be worthy of note would be judicial salary increases. This is for the judges to bring them up to the state allowed 95%. Citywide research and development within the mayor's department, the mayor's office, to be able to conduct citywide types of studies to be able to figure out where we should go as a city. The contract for animal services with Salt Lake County was up at the end of this fiscal year, so it's been renegotiated, and that will raise our costs by $360,000. We've increased tuition aid because of high usage. We budgeted okay, go ahead.
On the renegotiation for the animal control, did we expand service at all, or is it same level of service but just inflation?
It is the same level of service. They actually came to us, I think, 2 years ago and asked us for a cost increase, and we said we'll honor the contract. So now they're allowing us to pay for what they believe is our portion of those costs.
Chris, to your point, though, we talked about this in chair, vice chair a little bit.
Yeah.
That with this contract, we talked 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks, or whenever it was, about the off-leash dog issue and expanding service on that. So that may be something that will. That's not included though in this, and so we'd have to come back and revisit that.
Okay, yeah, that's where I was headed. Thanks.
So we did include a one-time expense for transitional expenses associated with the mayor's election and with council elections. So those costs are currently within the budget at $356,000.
John, I feel like sometimes that's something we've done in a budget amendment.
We have done that in budget amendment in past years.
Okay.
We were asked to make sure that we thought about that as those elections came about.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's better to look at it in the whole of the budget than for us to have a $500,000.
I think one of the other reasons we did it is because of your ordinance adoption pertaining to when Mayor Biskupski came in and setting those criteria, it makes it easier for us to set these transition expenses.
So this includes that, the sort of salary stipend
Salaries as well,
interim?
yes.
Okay, not just the computers and
Nope,
all
everything.
the other turnover.
This is set to cover most of those, all of those expenses.
Okay, so we can expect something like this every 4 years, but is there also a general fund, or rather a general budget address for the off years for the council
Do it
members?
for the off years, for the council members as well.
That's so great to have that in there. Thank you.
And could we have a breakdown of what is included and what is excluded in that, if we don't already have that?
Yep, we can provide that. There is golf funding, an increase in golf funding of $579,000. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. And additionally, there are some additional costs associated with IMS. Some of those are software and maintenance ongoing cost increases, as well as some new software. So as we speak to the IMS, we'll talk about those specifically as well. I have 4 slides for funding our future. They're really just the same thing that you've seen in the budget book, so we'll just kind of talk about them quickly, individually. Within housing, we've budgeted some additional funds for New House 20 to help stabilize individuals that are experiencing homelessness, additional funding towards the Community Land Trust, and also some money set aside to provide loans and discounts for future developments. In transit, the budget allocates $5.3 million there for the initial launch of the first 3 lines of the frequent transit network. It also has $800,000 for the rideshare program, and then funding for support along with those programs. In public safety, I got to remember which one's next. The budget includes the hiring of 23 additional police officers to bring the total from Funding Our Future to 50 new police officers. As we met to discuss this, one of the key features that the proposal would include is using those police officers to help all areas within the city, including city parks and other areas like that. 2 other pieces within public safety. The budget also includes funding for a new body camera initiative to be able to get the police officers new body cameras that will provide opportunities to be able to make sure that that they're working automatically instead of relying on the officer to be able to engage those body cameras. And then $4 million for police hybrid vehicles.
Do we know the breakdown on that? How many vehicles that?
110.
110? And how many vehicles if they were not hybrid?
We can find that out.
Okay, thank you.
And I have another question on that.
Yeah.
How many of the crossover types are we replacing with is it a Fusion? Is that the vehicle type?
Yes.
So I guess my question is, are we downsizing some of the fleet?
I can ask that question as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr.
Other
Chair.
questions? Councilmember Rogers and then Councilmember Fowler.
I guess mine's just for clarification, and mine's still tied to the police officers for Funding Our Future. I thought that we made a legislative intent that we didn't want to use the ongoing funding from Funding Our Futures for salaries. Maybe I'm wrong, but can we double check that? I thought we weren't looking at using salary for, to do the actual increase salary, not to pay for the officers, but looking at the increase for contract negotiation through union.
That is my vague recollection as well.
I could be wrong.
Well, no, but the Funding Our Future,
I think this was
we
the
talked,
problem.
yeah, I mean, we talked about using, I mean, we were pushing for 50. We got half last year. This, you know, completes that half, but the salary itself, I didn't think was coming out of funding our future. Councilmember Fowler.
We're having another discussion on funding our future in a minute, right? Who's going to be at the table for that? Because I don't want to ask, are you guys there for that discussion?
I will be here, but I believe that Liz and all the areas, the 4 areas, will also be here
Then
as well.
I'll hold my questions.
Okay.
Okay. All right. If we can find out on that intent language, that would be helpful. Okay.
And the last area for funding our future infrastructure, it continues funding for the new streets team and provides $2.1 million for infrastructure projects. So,
Fund balance.
oh, there's,
Fund balance.
so on that last slide, there's a couple of other pieces. Fund balance is budgeted at $900,000. What we've done there is we took 10% of the fund and of the new dollars, so we budgeted $9.5 million. We took $900,000 to make sure that we would maintain that 10%. Could it have been slightly higher to match that 542,000? Yes, but we felt that the funding was sufficient, that if we just budgeted 900,000 dropping to fund balance, that would ensure that the city would maintain that 10% requirement.
Mr. Chair,
Member Johnston.
this is going to be a discussion for later on, but I would like the council to discuss setting some, I'm not sure a policy or not, but something along the lines of a threshold at which we'd like to keep the fund balance higher than 10, I'd say 14. I say that because it's important generally, but in the last 2 budget cycles, as we point out, our sales tax now exceeds our property tax, which makes our budget much more volatile to the economy. And if the economy stalls or slows or goes south, we would be at much greater risk than we have in previous years for cuts, unless we have something in there that's sufficient to cover us. So it is a sacrifice of other things, but I'd like us in this cycle to talk through maybe an expectation we would have as a council about where we want to floor on that, maybe even a goal.
Okay, and we can have that discussion. Council member, Cindy, not council member.
No. I'm sorry, council member, you mentioned 14%. Were you saying you'd like it higher than that? I just couldn't quite hear.
Sure, I think we have a 10% right now just based on bond ratings, right? We can't blow that to leave it.
That's the goal, but we're actually doing better.
Exactly. So if we were to say that that shouldn't be our floor on what we should have, maybe our floor on what we should always have should be 12, 14%, something like that. Our goal might be higher, 15,
Okay, I see.
but we'd have some flexibility between our floor and what our goal would be.
Okay, that's helpful. I was worried I missed something. Thanks.
Councilmember Mendenhall. No? Okay.
I look forward to proposals from Councilmember Johnston about where we can take the money from to build that,
Mm-hmm.
and anybody else.
All right. More discussion right now? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. One last slide, well, 2 more slides, but one last slide on some of the new things. One of the other new things is the quarter-cent sales tax, the new county quarter-cent sales tax for transit-related items. Within there, we've budgeted for some people to make sure that the projects can move forward, but mostly we've set that funding aside, $2.1 million for urban trails. That's the 9-line and the Folsom Trail, and then some funding for intersection safety and multimodal operations and neighborhood street safety and livability. So those funding have been set aside. That left us with $1.5 million that we have indicated would be set aside for mobilization for the 6th North and 10th North transit lines.
Also note that this has been put into a new fund class. So this fund class is Fund Class 69. It's under transportation. Because these funds can only be spent for transit and transportation, we have separated them out from the general fund. They will be tracked separately, so anything that drops, so if the 1.5 will technically drop to fund balance and will be able to be reallocated in the next fiscal year. And if we receive more than 4.7, that will also drop to fund balance and be able to be reallocated. You know, keep in mind, like we always discuss, right, that this is going to have to be a self-sustaining fund now. So if you need to cover these 3 positions or something, some of these other areas, you're going to have to do that with inside this fund class, or you're going to have to do a transfer from the general fund.
So my question would be on the 9-line and Folsom Urban Trails. So you have 2.1 million set aside for those projects. Do we all are those projects? Do we have $2.1 million worth of shovel-ready projects there, or are we just trying to build the fund to take care of this? And John, I know, is jumping up rows and is willing to answer that question, I think. John Larson's our transportation director.
Seconds. Yeah, that's how much our staff said is the shortfall to finish those 2 projects.
Just to finish, okay.
So the central portion, we're about $1 million short for the central portion of the 9-line. We're about $1 million short to do Folsom Trail right.
Okay. So remove any change to that would impact the construction of where we need to be. Great. Thank you.
Lastly, just wanted to put a slide up of where we sit with general fund balance as of current projections. So these are the projections that we sent along with budget amendment number 6, and they are currently showing us at 14.46% in general fund balance. 14.4, almost 14.5.
All right, questions or comments now that we've had this quick overview? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Don't stray too far, because I'm sure we're going to be asking a lot of questions.
Hey, Councilmember Chair, we're going to speak about the revenues and the revenues for the current year, as well as revenues, go into more detail for the revenues for next fiscal year as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, so these are actually the projections for the current fiscal year, so it'll just give you an update of where we are right now. As you can, if you can read this slide, hopefully it's a little bit better than the others, but general fund revenue right now is trending above budget by about $2.7 million. It's mostly due to property taxes and sales and use taxes. Offset by the declining revenues from franchise taxes, as we mentioned before. We do continue to monitor and research the reasons for that decline, and as I mentioned, hopefully we can focus in the next legislative session on maybe making some changes to that. Our building permit revenues and our plan check fees are higher than budgeted, offset again by a loss in the business parking permits not being realized. We are looking at ways to maybe reinvigorate that program and maybe make it work and be more successful in the future. In the intergovernmental revenue section, we received $402,000 of unbudgeted reimbursement from Salt Lake County, so we're showing a little bit of a positive variance in that area. Again, parking tickets is down about 25% issuance from last year, so we are reflecting in our projections here a revenue loss of about $2.2 million. Also, parking meter collections are down, and we really feel there's a strong correlation between number of tickets issued and people's, willingness to pay for at the meter. They know they're not going to get a ticket, so they don't pay. So we really see a strong correlation there. In the charges and services area, the library parking garage is now being...
Can I ask you a question on that one? So we're under budget right now on what was projected for tickets and fines.
Yes.
But with the recommendation to increase the price and increase the fine, I get how that balances budget-wise, but that's what's always been a frustration to me. Anytime we do these budgets, we seem to balance our balance a part of the budget on parking, knowing that it's not real. How much of the increase in the hourly and how much of an increase, or how much does the increase in the fine play into actually accomplishing something versus making the budget balance?
Well, our projections are really based on the number of tickets we've seen being issued this year. We've been basing it on payments received, not just tickets we hope will be issued. So we feel like they're fairly accurate and conservative. The amount between the parking fine increase as well as the parking meter rate increase is about $1.4 million. It covers about half of the loss that we're going to see next year between the lower ticket issuance and the legislative impact. So it's not covering the whole thing.
Okay. Questions?
Also, Council Chair, we have a updated slide that will show you the revenues versus the number of tickets, and you can see that on a historical basis
Okay.
in this.
Thank you. Councilmember Valdemoros?
And what did you say the fines are lower? Do you have a specific reason for that?
For what's that?
Or having fines have decreased? It's just, I'm not understanding. Things are lower, like the tickets and then the fines. I'm sorry, the parking meters and then the fines, and then we're trying to come up with an increase so that we can be back.
Right. Well, so we are seeing a pretty big drop in the number of tickets that are being issued right now from compliance, right?
Okay.
So parking tickets. They're severely understaffed, and I think they're trying to build their staff up, but I think we were looking at 11 vacant positions when we were running the budget numbers. So, that's definitely contributing to that issue. And then whenever you see that kind of drop in the number of tickets issued, you see that a correlating drop in the number of, in the amount of parking meter revenue we receive. Kind of word gets out there that they're not really issuing tickets, and so people don't pay at the meter either, right? So we definitely see that correlation. Okay. So our hope is that we, increase the meter revenue a little bit. We get, more enforcement going. They can hopefully fill some of those positions and get that moving. And that hopefully between that and an increase in that base fine, we can sort of maintain somewhat of a status quo.
So also, let me clarify, last year, during legislative session, not this previous one, the one prior to, there was a Senate bill, 366, that limited us to only a 25% late fee. That will drop our fines and late fees significantly, which has a decrease going forward. So that's where the fine discussion comes in, is the fines will end up dropping because the late fees, we used to have 2 late fees on expired meters and 3 on everything else. Now we've got to drop it to 25% in total.
Thank you. Did that help? So going back to the projections, a couple other just notable changes in the miscellaneous revenue category. Let's see, is that where I was at? Yeah. Utility reimbursements are coming in a little bit under budget, but they're offset by some increases in claims and damages, and also our credit card surcharge, which seems to be coming in higher than expected. We are seeing a drop in collections revenue in line with the number of parking tickets that are being issued, but we finally contracted with the Office of State Debt Collections, and they're helping us as a third party to collect on some of our things, and they've been quite successful. So they're kind of helping offset that. In interfund reimbursements, it's under budget due to some changes in the billing of contractual services. There will be an offsetting reduction in expense for that. And transfers is a little bit under budget just because we've changed the way we bill for the capital asset manager through CIP. So just some of the major revenue categories. This is going to be where we are now in line with the projections I just showed you, and then I've also added the 2020 budget just so you can see where we're going. But this is property tax revenues broken down by the major, or the categories that are inside of the total property tax revenues. And then every year we try to show you the GIS values by council district, so you can kind of see where each district is going at. Every district seems to be seeing a little uptick in value, which I think was expected. So this is the residential property. Also, there's one for the commercial property by district. So last year, I think we only showed 4 or 5 years of sales tax, and somebody asked for a larger history, so we've given you a history back to 2005, so you can see the trend that we're seeing in sales tax receipts. We have been pretty conservative in our budgets, and typically our receipts have been higher than budgeted. Hopefully that that trend is continuing into 2020 with but we're conservative about how we're budgeting that.
So the other thing that I want to point out as far as sales tax is, we have seen a slowdown over the last 2 years in actuals collected year over year. So when we budgeted sales tax this year, we did a conservative 4% increase, whereas in previous years it was 5.5 and 6%. So we've seen a slowdown in the collections, so we did a conservative estimate for sales tax, which, is point to Councilmember Johnson and how volatile sales tax is, so we took a conservative approach this year.
So this next slide is to kind of show you the areas, the different sectors where the sales tax comes in. Our largest sector is obviously retail trade. That's about 41% of all of the sales tax receipts. Accommodations and food service are next at about 14%, and wholesale trade. These three make up 69% of the sales tax we receive. Just to hone in on the top three, the retail trade, I like this yellow line to show you the percentage change, and this is one of the areas that we are concerned about. Whenever you see a drop in retail trade, it's sort of an economic indicator that maybe sales, that things are starting to slow down. So we've noticed that retail trade has dropped by about 2% over last year. So that's what's caused us to be so conservative about our budgeting.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Will you go back to that slide, Mary Beth? Thank you. What do you know about this, or is this following a national trend? Does this have anything to do with shift to online sales? What do we know about this?
I don't know that we have dug that deep into it. We just completed these slides like a week ago, but I think that is something that one of our financial analysts, the one that tracks sales tax, I think that he is tracking this very closely, and that he is digging into both the retail sales and the eating and drinking, right? Both of those, you see a decline when we start down the recession path. Retail sales and eating and drinking, both people stop eating out and drinking out. They do everything inside their homes.
But then will you go back 2 more slides to the historic sales tax receipts and our projected? 1 more, back. That one. So we're still anticipating an increase.
Right, but the increase is slowed down, and the increase is in total, right? So it's total sales. So you'll see 2 slides where it's decreased percentage of change, but you'll see 1 slide where there's a significant increase in wholesale goods percentage of change as we go forward into the last slide of categories.
And I know that makes us skip the food one, but I'll just ask now on that wholesale trade increase, is that a typical increase in category when we're beginning to see a slow or a decline in the
No.
economy? So this one's anomalous.
Yes.
Weird.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnston.
keeping on the tax question going forward, if as a city we are focusing on a cultural core concept, we may be moving ourselves more to be dependent on sales tax, I'm guessing. We don't have a lot of land. Depending on what happens with the inland port in the northwest quadrant, our property tax may not exceed our sales tax in the near future or the long future. I'm not sure how that looks. It's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around. But that combined with the state movement to tax services means that sales tax will be an increasingly large percentage, perhaps part of our budget going forward in the foreseeable future, just a guess. Is that something that can say accurately? I mean, it's a projection. I just don't know. But
I think you can. The only difference would be how the state is going to allocate out the sales tax once they put services into play, right? That's significant. That can be significant win or a significant loss, and I don't see it being anywhere in between. I don't see that it's going to keep us flat, but I think that that's where we need to focus, right, is for it to at least keep us flat once the services become taxable, but it could potentially hurt us significantly as well.
And I would say that's one of the things that is the most frustrating and concerning about the way that the tax discussion has taken place during the session and then, hopefully during the interim, because there are a lot of, it's not just industry that's being impacted by this, but I mean, our budget, it's hard to predict what things are going to look like once the legislature is done with the changes that they're going to make. But, Mary Beth's absolutely right. They can do any number of changes and it is going to have zero, positive impact for us unless we, look and adapt as well, because I think the state's going to be trying to reserve as much of that money as they possibly can, which makes things even more unpredictable.
And during legislation, we did several different scenarios, and we've created what I call lever. So if you tweak this lever, what will happen? If you change this lever, what will happen? The financial analyst who does sales tax, Andrew, has done some great work where if you just change this, what will happen with our sales tax? Or if you tweak this, what will happen with our sales tax? Because we had to be prepared during the legislative session.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so building permit revenues is one of our other major categories. As you can see, our revenues have exceeded our budgets every year. They are projecting about 12,000 permits this year, and that same number going forward. And then just a little visual on the parking ticket revenue. We are budgeting quite a decrease over last year. To try and be conservative and account for the number of tickets that are being issued. Last year, they were in the neighborhood of, I think 96,000 is where they were at, and now we're just a little over 70,000 budgeting this year, so.
Great. Questions? Comments? Okay. Thank you all. So the next item on our agenda is fiscal year 2019-2020 budget, our council staff's overview of the budget that we've heard. Jennifer Bruno is going to be joining us at the table in a minute. Oh, here she is. It's all right. So I'll turn the time over to Jennifer to talk from our council staff's take on the budget.
Great. Sorry about that. Thank you. The intention of this briefing is not necessarily to go over what the administration did, which is give sort of a high-level overview of the technical changes in the budget, but to maybe call out some of the policy changes that might be of interest to the council, or changes in the budget that relate more specifically to areas of council interest. So if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I'll just kind of go through the staff report in sort of general area by area, if that's okay. So the first area was talking about the trend that budget staff noticed, which is that we have been in a really unique position in the last 2 budget years to significantly enhance and expand the services that the city offers. It is not a typical place to be in the budget to have millions of extra dollars to decide what to do with. We're very grateful, of course, for that opportunity, but just wanted to flag it for you guys so that we could understand that both the decision of the council to enact the Funding Our Future sales tax and the decision of the county to levy the transportation option have been sort of the key reasons that the council and the city have been able to expand services in transit and infrastructure and public safety, and to understand that going into the future, we won't necessarily have the option to significantly expand the city budget, and so then we'll be sort of where we used to be, which is sort of rearranging the pie pieces instead of adding pie pieces. So that's a really, really broad overview, but it gets to sort of what Councilmember Johnston was saying, which is that we're seeing this trend of sales tax being an increasingly large portion of the city budget. And just to touch briefly on the previous conversation, I actually see an opportunity in the sales tax discussion at the state if they do restructure the sales tax more towards services and less towards goods. That could actually help offset some of that sort of decrease in retail goods, because if the distribution formula is in our favor, we happen to have a lot of a service-based economy in Salt Lake City. So to Mary Beth's point, it all depends on the details, but it actually could help be a buffer towards any kind of future drop in obvious retail sales that we all know is coming. So we're watching that closely, and I don't think any of us really know where it's going, but.
Do we have any historical data on services, kind of fluctuations in economies of up and down? Because we know sales tax kind of is
Right.
wide ranging, property doesn't much, but services, we have any sort of baseline to work on from this?
We could probably work with finance to get some more detail on that, but the way I kind of view it just from a budget analyst perspective is that the more diversified your portfolio is, the better. And so if one sector of if all sectors of the economy are going downhill, then that's, it is what it is. But we'll dig a little bit deeper into that with finance to see if there's any micro trends that they've recognized. And in the meantime, they are also involved with the chamber's discussions, getting input from businesses on what they believe. So going on to page 3 of the staff report, we've sort of segmented out the revenue changes in the mayor's recommended budget that relate to a sort of base or growing economy, and then revenue changes that relate to sort of an affirmative policy choice. A lot of times the council wants to understand what are the things in the budget that we can tweak sort of voluntarily, and what are the things in the budget that are what they are. So of course, base sales tax revenue, like we've just discussed, is what it is, and the council could certainly choose to take a more aggressive view of the sales tax growth and recommend that the budget be increased over what the mayor's recommended budget has in the budget. But I think that the finance department has certainly made a good case for sort of staying conservative on that estimate. In the past, that has been a path that the council has chosen, though. The next is $2.6 million in new growth property tax revenue. I consider this a sort of base revenue increase because it reflects the sort of growing economy of the city, new property development, things like that. It's something that we didn't used to be able to estimate, and we can now, thanks to finance staff's digging in on understanding the new property tax formula at the state level. They did build in a sort of $500,000 buffer. So of that 2.6 million, 500,000 is recommended to go to CIP. We'll get the final numbers from the state on June 8th, and at that point we'll know if we got 2.6 million or if we got slightly less or slightly more. If we get less, unfortunately, that means the council has to balance the budget with less. We're not allowed to collect more than we're authorized. Although having that $500,000 buffer in CIP makes it a little bit easier because it's easier, of course, to cut a capital project than it is like an FTE or something. The next is just general fund fees for services, due largely to a CPI inflator index that the council built into general fund fees a number of years ago. That helps the city sort of keep pace with inflation. Previously, the council would have to sort of decide each year to increase fees, and there's obviously pros and cons to that, but this helps the city sort of keep up. That generates about $290,000. And then the expiration of the West Temple Gateway RDA project area is bringing in an additional $345,000 to the general fund. So that's the sort of end of the city's investment in that project area. In terms of revenue increases from policy choices or new proposals, we've discussed the sales tax options, and while the county sales tax option was the county's policy choice, they, if you remember, relied on cities to adopt resolutions of support before they would enact that sales tax revenue. Property tax stabilization is proposed to bring in $1 million, and this is an interesting concept. It does trigger the requirement for a truth in taxation hearing. So from the perspective of the state, this is effectively a property tax increase because we are proposing to collect more property tax revenues next year than we did the previous year, or than were budgeted the previous year. But what finance has pointed out is that when we collect more money in the current year, we'll lose that money unless we budget it in the next year. And so this is a way to sort of recognize when we've collected more money in the current year than we budgeted. It does. There is sort of a calculated risk, if you will, that if the economy sort of tanks in the middle of the year, this is effectively a property tax increase on all property owners. But the hope is that the economy continues to grow and that new growth will pay that $1 million.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thank you, Jennifer Bruno. I love how every year you explain this so well to us, and it's almost like it's new every year because, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, if we are to recognize the growth that we have been experiencing, we are currently experiencing in this coming budget, we have to go through the state requirements. We have to go through a truth and taxation process in order to capture and plan to spend that new growth revenue.
Yes.
And I appreciate the state's requirements for us to do this so publicly. And I also appreciate what finance was saying about a couple of predictors that looks like we may be slowing down. And so that'll be in my mind as we talk about what we want to do with the truth and taxation process and how much of that we go full throttle or pull back on.
And maybe to put a little finer point on it, I think due to the state's requirements about when and by what date we have to have that truth and taxation hearing and by what date we have to adopt a balanced budget, in many ways the council's put in the position of deciding right now before we know. And so there is a little bit of a, it is what it is, and that we have to put the cart before the horse a little bit.
It's a 2-month difference, isn't it?
Right.
It's mid-August.
Right, is in mid-August. Yeah, and then you have to adopt a balanced budget by the end of June, technically. And so there is, right now, the mayor's budget is balanced with, assuming that $1 million is part of the budget. So if the council wants to pull that out, obviously that would mean either reshuffling or reducing expenses.
Well, I would appreciate your keen eye and feedback and Ben and the rest of the budget team. June 8th is sort of that notorious date we get. It's also my birthday, which is a fun thing to get our final revenue totals on my birthday. But I would appreciate your advice and thinking and helping us think through what that might mean in terms of next year's revenue and what we should be responsibly doing with that taxation process. Thank you.
Will do. The next item is a sort of similar placeholder until we get final information from the state. It's a judgment levy. Doing this also triggers the truth in taxation process, but this one is a little different in that it's a one-year, one-time property tax increase, essentially to pay the city, pay ourselves back for property taxes that were opposed by private property owners or centrally assessed property owners, things like that. For this year, it's $443,000, and this is another one of those where if on June 8th the state comes and says that your judgment levy is actually only $300,000, we'll have to make up that difference in the budget and rebalance it. So. The next is a decision to increase parking meter rates by 50 cents from $2 to $2.50 an hour. We discussed it a little bit more. Just to give the council a sense of what that generates a year, it's $786,000 in revenue for the fiscal year 20 budget. And the next item about parking meter fine increases generates about $700,000 in revenue.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, I had a question in regards to parking revenues. Do we see more transactions occurring or fewer transactions with our? I mean, is it?
I'll have to get
yeah,
back to you
I mean,
on
are we
that. I
looking
don't
at
know.
fewer cars in the city, or are we looking at
Okay.
fewer trips downtown? What is it that we're looking at that's causing these to be?
Okay. We'll get back to you on that, unless someone behind me knows.
No one's volunteering.
Okay.
So.
You had to have like a mirror. There are a number of revenue decreases. The one that Mary Beth and her team mentioned is the franchise tax decrease, which is a national trend. This is one of those items that if the council wants the legislative subcommittee to look at, sort of on a basis for next year's legislative session, we could certainly put that on the list. I'm not sure how simple of a problem it is to solve, but it seems like there's a structural issue there that every municipality that relies on franchise fees is facing, and so that frequently is the route that we go, maybe even working in conjunction with the league. So. The next is fines and forfeitures. This gets to what Mary Beth mentioned, that HB 366, when it passed, reduces the city's flexibility in charging late fees. Because those had already been built into the budget, this is about a $2.5 million hit to the city budget. So it's tough. And then the next is the parking permit program. If the council remembers a few years ago, maybe it was even last year, the city created a new parking permit program for businesses. This was to attempt to get a better handle on who legitimately needed freight loading passes and who really just needed some sort of parking pass. And so that participation in that program has not been as robust as we would hope. And so they're reducing the revenue to reflect the actual participation, but staff has asked what kinds of things we could do to get participation in that program up. There's a number of public utilities items that I believe you guys have covered previously in your public utilities briefing, so I won't get into those unless there are follow-up questions on those. Okay. And then we have a chart here that attempts to sort of organize the various general fund staffing increases. There are a number of positions that were added or shifted in the budget amendment, and so we've tried to delineate which items are proposed to be added in the current budget, the fiscal year 20 budget that's in front of you, and which positions are essentially already kind of a ship that sailed because you funded it in the budget amendment. So let staff know if you have any specific questions on any of those. There are a couple that are funded by Funding Our Future. Sales tax dollars. The three that you won't see on this chart are the ones that are related to the county option transportation tax, and that has to do with the way that Mary Beth mentioned that they're handling the accounting of those funds, and the FTEs are actually in that separate fund class, so it's almost treated as a separate fund, even though those employees will essentially be reporting to the general fund department. And that's not all that uncommon. There are a number of FTEs in the attorney's office that are funded partially through insurance and risk management, for example, but it's just something for our council staff as we make and update these charts to remember. So. The next are just a sort of very high-level review of council priorities in the past year. Oh, go ahead, yeah.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
back to the FTEs, and I apologize if you mentioned this, but all of these changes are increases, new FTE positions, right?
Yes, in this particular budget year, yes.
Are there any eliminated positions or attrition that happened that are remaining unfilled in the
That's a good
proposed
question.
budget?
I'll do a more exhaustive review and look at it. There's a potential that there's a couple net increases, like a reduction in one place and an addition in one place that I'm not capturing on this. So
The IMS director is one position I'm wondering about.
okay, I'll look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, then so council priorities, and this is in no kind of particular order, but these are just council priorities that we've been tracking over the years. The Transit Master Plan implementation, this was something that when it was adopted, there really wasn't a funding source, a dedicated funding source to implement the Transit Master Plan because all the general fund dollars had been spoken for, and transit really wasn't a core service of the city's general fund at that time. And so the new sales tax funding really created the avenue to implement the Transit Master Plan. There's about $7.7 million towards implementing that program, and that's not including the county transportation option, which will also be a huge part of that. Funding Our Future overview, we'll get into more detail on that item. Homelessness, the mayor's proposed budget continues the process of consolidating the budget for homeless services expenses into the CAN budget. This is all except for, of course, public safety and any RDA, affordable housing development. They're proposing to add a program manager FTE in this budget year. The community and neighborhoods budget is scheduled for next week, and so we're hoping to get a little bit more detail comparing last year and this year and what changes there are. But the biggest change is probably the $685,000 that was in the council's budget last year for treatment beds. It was going to be a contract with Salt Lake County. The county was not able to acquire additional treatment beds, and so the administration is proposing to repurpose those dollars mostly for VOA HRC site mitigation. That's about $500,000. And then $185,000 additional for parks cleanup. So items that are related to homelessness, but not the original intent of that funding. The next item is public safety in general, and staff has prepared a chart kind of showing the 3-year history of E911, fire, and police. I'm realizing that this chart left off spending in fleet, which also relates to public safety. Clearly, fire fleet is huge and police fleet is huge. So this sort of shows, in total, there's $133 million in fiscal year 20 proposed to public safety, which is probably the largest share of the city's budget. The next is affordable housing. Go ahead.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you for defining public safety with all 3 of the divisions in there. And this comparison chart is actually incredibly helpful to see where we're at in actually funding all 3 of these very vital departments within public safety. So thank you for that.
So the next item is affordable housing. There's a significant influx of funding for affordable housing relating to the Funding Our Future initiative, and I'll leave that detail to them. But the base budget for HAND is $5.2 million, and then Funding Our Future adds an additional $5.2 million on top of that. So essentially doubling the budget for that. That's aside from the RDA's investment in affordable housing, which is its own budget, which we'll go over next week. The next is sustainable funding for infrastructure. The proposed budget includes 7% of funding for CIP, which is what has historically been identified as a minimum, although I think at this point, maybe Cindy would agree with me that that number is just something we hang on to because we love it and it reminds us of home or something. I don't know. It isn't really, the study hasn't been updated in years. I think we can all agree that less funding would not be good. And so I know that the current administration is looking to update the capital facilities plan and the impact fee facilities plan, which will be key to figuring out exactly how much of our general fund we need to be allocating every year. It could be 9%. So I just want to put a flag in it there that just because we've achieved 7%, which is good, doesn't mean we're sort of done.
Charlie, can I ask a question again?
No. Yes, Councilmember Fowler.
Speaking of those plans, do you happen to or does our council staff happen to know where those updated plans are in the works? I know that we had a briefing on it earlier, but, you know, I don't remember yesterday much, so.
If no one's getting it behind me, which doesn't, we can make sure to ask that in conjunction with the CAN budget, which I believe is next week.
I think so too, yeah, because I think you're right, that information would be helpful to see kind of how we want to move forward with the funding of CIP projects and the priorities, and we know that the Ben, what's the name of it?
Capital Facilities Plan?
The capital facilities plan, is that yeah, and all the maintenance and the deferred maintenance and trying to come up with a 10-year plan and all this other stuff that we have. So it would be helpful to kind of understand, and maybe with public services, because I think they're doing that as well, understand where those are in the process, and if we can see some of that, so we can make some good decisions here with increasing, if need be, this funding.
And we'll pass that along. I'll say that the last information, the last update I heard about it was that they were beginning to pull together some of that data. So I'm not sure that you'll have it in time for the decision-making process now, but we'll certainly ask that and ask them for a timeline. The other sort of new piece of information about CIP that I forgot to put in this report is state law changed recently. Well, no, actually, this was actually related to an interpretation of existing state law that clarified for us, and I'm smiling because it means more work over the summer for Ben and myself, that the council needs to adopt the CIP final funding log by September 1st.
Oh.
So in previous years where we've kind of, in some years taken in, we usually adopt by the end of September, sometimes it leads into October a little bit. In this year, we'll have to prioritize that on the agenda to accomplish it by September 1st.
Okay.
So, let's see.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about the neighborhood street safety and livability piece. This is something that used to be in our budget years ago, way before me. And I'm very happy to see this back in the budget this year. It's something that I think all of us we hear complaints regularly from constituents about crosswalk safety, other street safety. When we talk about complete streets, as a council, typically we are only talking about lane reduction. This is something that actually will do more, in my opinion, for complete streets than anything else that we've talked about in the past. So I just wanted to acknowledge that from CAN that is a very good addition in this budget.
And just to make it clear, that is being funded through the county option sales tax, and so it's funded directly through that separate fund class. Ben provided some information about what it would take if the council wanted to increase CIP to 8%, which has been something that the council has done in the past. It's about $3 million. And then what percentage of CIP is sort of already pledged to debt service. That's about 60%. So about $8.5 million is available to spend on new project. And that's actually better than it's been in previous years, so I'll just say that. So. There's also kind of a brief overview of all the different ways we fund infrastructure. And then the overall fiscal health of the city. This has obviously been a council priority, and that's where we review the fund balance amounts. It's about 14% above the 10% level. Obviously, if the council has different fund balance targets, we can update that information. Let's see. I think I'll skip some of these other items. Some additional items starting on page 9. The legislative intents of the council, for the first time that I can recall, I don't know if they were last year, the legislative intents and administrative responses are all in the budget book. So starting on page C20, I have not listed them all here, but if you're interested, that's where they are. One-time revenue versus one-time expenses. The administration did balance this budget without using one-time revenue to pay for ongoing expenses, which is a first that I can recall. So we like that. That's a great idea. There are a few sort of operational reductions in various departments that, as council staff, we always flag because While a department might be able to go 1 year without operations and maintenance or equipment, it's usually difficult for departments to go multiple years without those line items. And so while they're a one-time reduction this year, they tend to come back in previous years as a budget need. And so we flagged that as about $319,000 in various departments that relate to one-time reductions. So I imagine that each of those departments will go into more detail about what that means operationally for the department. In some cases, they might be fine removing it permanently, but in other cases, it might be a thing that the council might want to revisit adding back in at some point. Let's see. Other expense-related items of note, compensation, there's a 2% proposed increase across the board for city employees. There is a proposed agreement with the police department that's more complicated than I understand, and so Ben can speak to that if you have questions about it, but it is funded in the mayor's recommended budget, so no money would need to be added if the council didn't change anything to that. It's our understanding that fire compensation is not yet ratified, and we're not sure about AFSCME, so we'll check on that. I believe compensation is next week. So, golf, believe that the administration covered the key, overall budget impact of the proposal for golf. The overview staff report goes a little bit more into how the administration arrived at that conclusion. I can go over that, or I'm happy to just skip it, depending on what people feel like. Maybe I'll just skip. I'll just skip it. We have golf scheduled on the agenda, I believe, 2 weeks from tonight. Fleet, the administration is recommending an additional $4 million from Funding Our Future, and then an additional $1 million from just general fund to increase the contribution to fleet. This has been one of those funds that for years staff has flagged as a structural deficit problem. The administration has convened a working group, which Ben was able to help out with, and they've been looking at it. And so this gets the fleet fund a long way towards funding sustainability.
Is this is only specifically for the police vehicles, is that correct?
$4 million of the increase is for police vehicles, but my understanding is that the additional $1 million would just be in general fleet replacement. So that would help out in general. And the way the fleet fund works, in order to, the things are all kind of linked in that if police vehicles are replaced on a more regular basis, that affects the maintenance budget, which helps out the rest of the fleet fund. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so we can get more information on exactly how and in what way, but it's our understanding that it helps in general the overall health of the fleet fund.
I know we're going to be hearing from fleet, but I want to say that the fleet was in, how much are they behind in swapping out? Was it more than 7 to 17 million?
Yes, the council had asked it for a 10-year fiscally sustainable plan from Fleet. In fiscal year 18, it proposed $10 million, so doubling the flat $5 million that they had received since 2005 before then. And then it escalated to $13 million, and then it fluctuated between 16 and 18 million for the rest of the 7-year period. So 17 million at the time. And one of the requests we're making to Fleet is if they have an updated version of the 10-year plan and how this $4 million would factor into the ideal funding level.
When we get to that conversation, I hear rumors of things like that we put $2,500 worth of transmission replacement work into a vehicle that would sell at auction for $1,000. And so I'm wondering about what are our maintenance costs versus, and I know that we've had those presentations in past years, but it would be helpful when we get to the fleet discussion with as many new council members as we have to revisit what those trade-offs are for our decreased investment compared to what we know we need.
The one thing I'll add is the $4 million increase for police fleet would allow the police fleet to be turned over every 5 to 6 years so that you are selling the vehicle for the resale value and minimizing the maintenance costs. This is the best practice in the industry, is to sell the vehicle within 5 to 6 years, especially police vehicles, which are in office, and the usage of the vehicle is usually 2.5 times what's on the odometer because they're left running and sitting so frequently.
Cindy?
Just to clarify, Ben, that assumes that this dollar amount is put in annually.
Correct, as an ongoing.
So that's what the council would need to be prepared for, is that this portion of funding our future money would be an annual appropriation.
Councilmember Fowler.
I was just going to say that if it would be helpful at all, I happen to know the person who auctions off our old city stuff. But it's helpful to understand if we would want to invite him to just answer questions about how this turnover actually works, because $4 million every year is a lot, but I think it is helpful to understand at auction what we actually get for those vehicles, and when it is kind of best practices to turn it over and how we can do that. If anyone is interested, I'm just throwing it out there that I'm certain that Mr. McKee would answer any questions for anybody about that, if that would be helpful.
Last thing on fleet, I don't want to belabor the discussion. In response to the council members' questions earlier, the choice to get hybrid sedans versus other SUV vehicles was discussed in the fleet committee, and the fleet committee had recommended the sedans because you would get more of them, whereas the SUVs were more expensive, so for the same $4 million, you would get about 3 fewer vehicles total. So that was the trade-off, and there's additional information about the sustainability goals for the city, the output from using the hybrid versus the non-hybrid, if the council's interested.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in that, and I would also be interested, based on my earlier question to Jennifer about, how many normal or regular police cars, what that $4 million would be for regular police cars, for the hybrid sedans, and then the hybrid SUVs as well, because I think that we have a number of competing requirements in the city. Sustainability is one of them, but it's not the only, and so I think we're going to have to look at all of that.
Okay. The next item is health insurance. The city a number of years ago switched to an HSA model, a high deductible health savings account model, high deductible health plan. Is still proposing to donate $750 for a single employee and $1,500 for a double and a family into the health savings accounts to help offset with the high deductible. It's resulted in significant claims savings, and which has helped the city's premium increases, manage the city's premium increases. The city's premium increase is proposed to be about 7.5% this year. The administration is proposing a premium holiday, which will help offset this cost for the average employee. So that's been a unique sort of tool that the city has used to manage health insurance expenses, which a lot of other companies are struggling with. Retirement is a cost that we can't control. The costs are not projected to go up significantly this year, but I always flag it every year as one of those things that, subject to whatever URS tells us, could change. So this year is good news on that. And then every year, the council is interested in objectives and measurements for each department. We've noticed that each department write-up has included objectives and measurements that the departments are tracking. And so we'll include those as relevant in the various sort of department-specific reports. But if there's any ideas that the council has about items, metrics that would be helpful or useful as you deliberate your budgets, I know the administration's always welcome to ideas. So with that, that's it, I think.
Great. Questions, comments? Councilmember Mendenhall.
So helpful. It's
Yes,
such a
thank
helpful
you.
budget introduction to have you go through this. Thank you.
Okay, so the next item on our list is not a break. Good try, though. It's the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget, the overview from the Department of Economic Development. Allison Rowland from our staff is going to introduce this, as well as Sylvia Richards, and then Laura Fritz will join them at the table as well. After their presentation, we will have a break.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Not sure if I'm close enough. The Economic Development Department budget actually changes very little in the mayor's recommended budget. The total overall budget would be about $49,000 higher than last year's, and that really just reflects the standard changes to personnel services that we see across the board in the city, or virtually across the board in the city. There's also a reduction in this department's budget for M&O, management and operations, and that would reduce the department's travel and training budget. And I suspect that the department director and the division director can talk a little more about that. I'll let Sylvia talk about the key points on the Arts Council budget. Thanks.
Hi there. I just wanted to mention that as Allison said, the Arts Council budget is only increasing proposed increase by about let's see, let me get to the right page here. My apologies. 2.6% over last year's budget, and there's a $91,000 decrease, and that relates to the transition from last year. That funding is no longer being included in the budget. And I wanted to mention specifically that on page 2 of the Arts Council and Economic Development staff report, item 1 under non-departmental transfer, the Arts Council administration brought to my attention that the $35,000 split for Twilight and $25,000 for Living Traditions is incorrect. That is not the correct split. The Arts Council will continue its core programs and focus as well on their pilot programs. Those include Mondays in the Park, Living Traditions Peace Gardens Garden Party, the Busker Festival, and expansion of Living Traditions workshops at various city library locations. The Arts Council has not yet received their ZAP funding, the Zoo Arts and Parks, and they have not received their arts funding from the state of Utah. So the true costs of the pilot programs and versus the Twilight funding have yet to be identified. So the Arts Council might want to talk more about that. And I'll turn that over to Laura.
Thank you. And council members, I want to say thank you. It's hard to believe that it was less than 3 years ago that I sat in front of you talking about becoming the director of this new department. And to think in 3 years, we've built out a business development division. We've turned around some challenges at the Arts Council. And we also have worked diligently on the budget for the RDA. And now to see all 3 of those divisions working together, I think is really impressive. And so thank you, because without your support of this vision that we've created for economic development, we wouldn't be successful. With that, though, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Collender, our Deputy Director of Economic Development, to go through our budget presentation for this year.
Council members. So we'll start with just a quick overview in, what we're looking to do here. Some of the key budget changes council staff has outlined. We want to go over these at a high level now, just they're on the screen, and we'll go through it in more detail as we go through our presentation on what some of these funds will be used for, what the impact are on some of these reductions. But we also want to go through and highlight some of our accomplishments from the year. What did you get for the funding that we were allocated last year? And then what are we thinking at a high level for next year? And just, some of the high level considerations that we're thinking about. We've seen a lot of movement in life sciences, IT, and aerospace. And so there's a lot of opportunity to capture there. So we're going to be placing a strategic focus on those industries over the next year. We also are looking at some synergies with partners and decreasing some of our travel. This is some of the O&M reduction that you see, and we'll go into some of our metrics later on what that impact might be. Also, and Felicia will speak to this in more detail, we are looking at increasing the programming for the community. Some of this has to do with some of the feedback that we've received from the community through some of the processes with some council funding or some funding that was appropriated by council last year. But some of it also is strategic for Tier 1 in the county and maintaining that status based off of qualifying expenses. And Felicia will speak more to that as well. And the final thing that we're going to be focused on over the next year is wrapping up our strategic plan that we presented to council just over 2 years ago. So it's coming up on our 3rd year, and we want to make sure that we deliver on what we said we were going to deliver on our strategic plan. So that at a high level, that's what we'll be thinking about for FY20. So I really want to start, talking about some of our progress over the last couple of years with this number. And if I can entertain the council for a moment on this number, does anybody know what this number is? This is a number that says what our businesses thought of Salt Lake City 3 years ago. So on a scale from -100 to +100, when we did our initial survey when we were a department, we got -24.91. What that means is businesses are actively telling other businesses to go invest somewhere else. They're not satisfied with the city, and the major barriers to growth involved workforce, it involved finding the right space for the right price, and really figuring out how to navigate some of the city framework. So that's what we've based a lot of our work on over the last couple of years. And, and that'll take me to the next slide. So this slide is a visual representation of, our progress. Last year we did the same survey. We got -7. It said businesses were still saying, if you have to, I guess you can invest in Salt Lake City, but there are also other places to invest. And you could start to see that needle moving to +6. And just to sort of paint the picture on what this means, this shift in our Net Promoter Score is quite substantial. This isn't something to skim over. This is our customer service for businesses. And this is a survey that we put out that's professionally done by EDC Utah, an independent economic development organization. So what you could see on some of these scores, just to put this in relation, we're catching up to what some of these other scores are. For like Coca-Cola is a 20. Everybody knows that brand, right? EDC Utah, our partners, have raised their scores substantially as well over the past few years, and they're at 17.89 right now. Ford is at a 28, and Harley-Davidson is at a 50. And Laura was at a great event with EDC Utah recently, and they were talking about what a 50 means. And it means people are getting a tattoo of your brand on their body. And so, we've got a little ways to go at 6% to get to that 50 mark and have that happening for Salt Lake City economic development. But this is some of the progress that we've made so far.
Councilmember Fowler.
So if I get a Utah tattoo with like a special little like Salt Lake City heart or something, does that increase our scores at all?
I'm not sure if it works in the reverse, but
dang it,
possibly.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
Ben, can I ask a question? Not for right now, but I would love to learn more about, and I know in past years you've talked to us about what businesses are surveyed, and of course they respond of their own accord, but I'd love to learn more about the downtown businesses versus locally owned businesses, and obviously we have some big national brands here too.
And we did just transmit to the mayor's office that'll come to you a quick overview of this short survey that we did that does sort of show who responded to it this time.
Great.
I'm not sure it included where, but we can ask EDC Utah to pull that data for us.
Thank you.
You will get that transmittal imminently.
It would be really fun to see the map of the city and then sort of locate where we receive responses from in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions about this slide? And one more thing to note, we're working with EDC Utah to say, based off of the surveys, what are the most strategic things that we could be doing to help raise that score moving forward as well, so that we're not doing it blindly. Of course, we and this takes me into the next slide, we do quite a few site visits with our local companies to get a good pulse on what that is. But there's also some raw data that EDC Utah has that they can share with us to help us get that insight on specifically what can we be doing for businesses locally. So this metric slide really represents, we are very intentional about what we do. And, we've done almost 800 site visits to local companies that has really contributed to businesses having a better perception of doing business in Salt Lake City. We've informed them of resources and where they're at. We've helped them navigate the city process. We've really broken down those barriers. I don't know if council members have seen or taken the business resource survey quiz that's on our website right now, but it helps you understand what are the resources, not only financially, because that can be such a complex landscape to navigate as a small business in particular, but informational ones. We have Open Counter, we have so many great resources in the city, and it spits out, it's 8 simple questions, and it puts out for you, hey, what resources should I be considering as a small business? And so that's something that's on our website now. And as council members, we would ask you guys, if you're having questions from businesses about this in your district, to feel free to share that, and it's a great resource for local businesses. We'd also like to encourage, we set site visits as a metric, and this is very intentional for us in our engagement with the business community, because we feel like this is a great way for us to have a pulse, but also it pushes us to go out into the community. We don't just do it as a reactive, but as a proactive measure. So as council members find opportunity in their districts for our team to go visit businesses, whether it's a challenge that the business is having or just an opportunity in navigating some of the processes with the city, that's what we're here for, and we'd love to go do site visits as often as possible, as you can see from our metrics. And one final note that you'll see from our metrics, last year we came and talked to the council in the budget cycle about placing an emphasis on the west side. And so we said we wanted to do 60% of our site visits west of I-15. We noticed that businesses on the west side had different needs than businesses on the east side, but most of our natural course of business took us to site visits on the east side. So to remedy that, we really did open up our networks and really did door knocking on the west side. We got referrals to get up to the number where we're 13 site visits away now from meeting our mark of 180 site visits on the west side. And we've learned so much about some of the translation barriers to just micro loan funds are a critical thing on the west side, as opposed to some of the other standard offerings that we have in the city. So it's informing us on how to partner with other organizations to find resources for local businesses, as well as how to communicate with those businesses. So it's been really insightful to push to that west side, and we're working on how to work that in even better to the daily work that we do in our division. So some of our FY19 wins so far, this is just a standard logo sheet of some of our wins, but one of the things too that we take seriously is in our metrics, wins doesn't just mean a celebration of a company investing here. It stands for written impact narrative statement. So it means when a business publishes it's the city's involvement in their investment in the city and documents what we did to help that business invest here. So it's beyond a success, right, where a company is just, we really did help the company, but for one reason or another, it wasn't publicly published. So this is the most quality metric in terms of making a company making an investment and documenting our involvement in helping that investment happen.
So on those, if you could go back, are those all local companies that are expanding here?
A number of them are local businesses that are expanding. So Polarity TE was a company that has expanded here. Uda Health is new to the market. Dysgenics is an expansion. Olive & Cocoa is a Utah-based company expanding their distribution. Industry, of course, they're a Denver-based developer who's coming in and making investments all over the Granary District. And so Dry Spell, new startup, entrepreneur. So really just kind of a broad perspective,
okay,
from expansions to new companies moving into market.
Great, because I think that's good. I think that recruiting local business and retaining local business is important, but you know, we can't just rely on that. You know, one of the things that I was always very supportive about was having economic development split out into its own department. I think that, you know, that has needed to happen for a long time. What I'm really worried about with this budget, though, is that it looks like now that you've been, you know, that we have an organization where you're actually able to go and recruit business, we eliminate the travel budget. So how can you do your job? I mean, your job is to go out and find more business and recruit businesses to come here. And that means you're going to have to travel. You're going to have to go and, you know, visit companies where they are. How does that work if you can't travel? And just, you know, focusing on local business isn't enough. I just don't see that being enough. How do you anticipate getting past that?
And I love that question, and we're actually going to talk about it as we go into our slides.
Okay.
So in our metrics, one of the impacts that we've seen, we do a lot of out-of-market travel from everything from Select USA, which is recruiting in foreign companies, to which Stadler was actually originally a Select USA project, which ended up here in Salt Lake City, to you know, if we have a project like Project Eagle, the individual Amazon deals that we go out and travel out of market to. You know, some of those are, we received a lead that is a strong lead, and some of it we're prospecting a lot out of market. And so one of the things that we've cut back on in FY20 is a lot of the prospecting out of market. And so you can see that reflected in our metrics. We've cut our leads down by 50 leads and our opportunities down by 10. In the future, as we develop our sales force more, we can be even more accurate in what that means, but this is a rough estimate that we've received from some of the people working the numbers behind the scenes on what that impact will be, and how we should set our metrics to correspond with the travel reduction. The travel reduction is about 25% of our overall travel budget, and so it's not a complete cut, but it is a decrease in what we've had previously.
Yeah, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Ben, thank you for explaining that a little bit. I'm wondering, though, if back to that slide, if you wouldn't mind, if these decreases are a response to the administration asking you to trim your budget and not necessarily what you'd hope to accomplish in the coming year without travel decreases.
Well, budget constraints do play into some of the metrics, of course, because it's very difficult to keep up with the same amount of leads if you are not allowed to prospect out of market. And so that does impact the metrics to some extent. But this also, you know, the simple answer is yes. It gives us more time here locally as well to focus on local businesses. So it's just a trade-off in terms of how we spend our time as well.
Yeah, and I think to look at the numbers and say, well, like, I guess I'm wondering about if we could weight those metrics. If you could say, you know what, site visits are really, they're local, they're affordable, we can do a few in a day, but the impact maybe in our Net Promoter Score, or I guess I'm wondering, when it comes to the bottom line, how do we weight these metrics so that we can say, so that the council can appropriately evaluate where we should concentrate investment if we want it to be different than what the recommended budget looks like, and where are those greatest opportunities for your department to help our economy flourish. You know what I mean? That site visits aren't necessarily the same as wins or out-of-state visits. So can you help us understand if there's some weighting to the opportunity from a budget aspect?
The way that we think about our metric is really twofold. One is sort of customer service, right? How are we providing for businesses here versus, you know, sales, right? How do we sell a new company on coming in? And it's hard to draw an exact line in the sand on where that is, because oftentimes if you're providing good customer service locally, businesses here will also say good things about your city and investing here, and that alone may recruit new businesses in, right? So drawing that line is a little bit difficult. So it's all about strategy and what we're doing with the funds and spending more time locally here. We're trying to focus on the net promoter score a little bit more to increase the recruitment in that way. But we can look at some more data in depth that we can get you on what exactly that means and provide that to the council. But just very roughly speaking, that's some of the thought process in this budget.
And I think the most important metric for us to take a look at, and we can get you this data, is what it costs us to bring in an out-of-market company. And we have a couple of those examples. And then we can then compare that against an expansion and what it costs us to do an expansion. That won't be scientific, but at least it'll give you an idea of what it takes to bring in a new company.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So the next portfolio of items that the department's working on are our events. So one thing I'd like to ask the council for some action on is to save the date on your calendar from August 26th to the 28th of this year for the United Nations being in town. I don't know if you council members have heard of that. But as we've briefed the council a few times before, this is a historic event for the city, and it's the first time that the United Nations has ever moved out of their extraterritorial property in New York City to go onto U.S. soil. And so this is a really big deal for our community and something that we would invite council members to attend. Registration is now open, so the UN's even told me, Ben, we won't allow you on site if you don't register. So I'd like to encourage council members to register as well. Another date to save on your calendar is June 9th through 11th, so this is the IEDC Future Forum. So this is where all economic development professionals nationwide come and talk about what sort of emerging technologies, what sort of future-leaning policies economic developers across the country are thinking about, and we're fortunate enough to be hosting them here in less than a month. And so it's another big event that we've been working on. And we also have just completed the Site Selectors Guild. Laura, you probably had a lot closer involvement on that one than I do, so maybe you want to just go over that quickly.
Sure. So it's the top 50 site selectors from around the country descended upon Salt Lake City to learn more about what was happening in Utah, but also to talk about sort of their industry best practices and how to work best with economic development organizations. The sort of impetus behind the site selectors was EDC Utah had done a survey, and it said that if site selectors had been to Utah, they were more likely to recommend Utah. And so what better way than to bring in all 50 of them for their conference and showcase Utah? And so it was an outstanding event, and thank you. I know a number of council members participated in parts of the pre-activities and post-activities, and it was a great opportunity for us to really showcase Salt Lake City and all the great things we have going on.
So with that, we would like to transition. We know we're going a little over time. We'd like to transition to some of the Arts Council items on the agenda. So Felicia, maybe you want to take it from here.
Hi, thanks for having me. I hope that we'll see you all at Living Traditions this weekend with your families, rain or shine, looking like rain. We wanted to kind of highlight some of our successes this year and talk a little bit about the direction we're going. Living Traditions is seeing growth as a program. This program is a high priority for me. This year, we're trying out a new model and expansion of our programming, which includes workshops. We've strategically partnered with the Salt Lake City Library in order to implement these not only for the festival but citywide at library branches in the future. So we have 15 new workshops with various cultural groups that are happening at the festival. We had a record number of applicants of food vendors at the festival, which means we know that the demographics in our community are changing and diversifying, and that was really exciting to see that. A lot of first-time participants to this festival this year in kind of all of our categories: craft, performance art, food. But we also have a lot of artists that have grown up with this program and stay with this program. So we have 15 artists or groups of artists that have participated in every year of the festival since 1986, which I think we're in our 34th year. So that's really exciting. We have 88 performing groups this year, 6 other first-time participants that are in those performing arts groups, and this program is one that we were tasked with last year of expanding programs, and that included the Mondays in the Park series at Liberty Park and the Fall Garden Party at the Peace Garden. So we're looking at increasing our geographic reach and reach to more cultural communities in the city. So that's part of that programming. And we plan to continue those programs in the future and hope to, because we've deemed them successful. Twilight Concert Series. Ben asked me to make images fit into the template, and that's hard for arts people. We are really excited about the community response that we're seeing so far for the Twilight Concert Series this year. We found a successful model that worked last year and felt like from community feedback we wanted to kind of hit the nail on the head with matching the mission of the program a little bit more. So our concert tickets are on sale now. Our new partner that we're working with, Sartain and Saunders, added a 6th concert because they were so excited about the opportunity and felt like it was a well-rounded curatorial program. Some of the goals that we set for this year so far for the program is just real diversity in lineup so that we see inclusion of for all city residents and representation. So we prioritized historically underrepresented groups, and we were able to kind of achieve that with including groups like women in music, LGBT communities, people of color, and a really kind of broad range of performers so that residents feel like they're represented. So far we have more VIP sales than we did last year, and we're really excited about the continuation of the program.
And council members, I just want to remind you that just a mere 2 years ago, we were having some really difficult conversations about Twilight. And by entering into the public-private partnership last year, as Felicia said, we did find a model that has worked. And we're excited about continuing a public-private partnership that allows for the city to limit its exposure on the cost of Twilight. And it's been an outstanding move for us and continues this great tradition of live music in our community and specifically in our downtown.
The public art program, just for example, this year received a record number of applications for our, we compared it to another nationally open project last year, which received 136 applications last year. This year we saw 318 applications, and we saw a higher proportion of Utah artists apply for those projects than we ever had, which is a real success because it can be challenging to get Utah artists to compete for these larger commissions. So that was something we really strived for, and 2 of those recommendations out of 3 were local that have gone on to mayor's office. So we're really excited about seeing an increase in that. In the last year, we completed, of course, the Granary mural projects in cooperation with local businesses and Utah artists. And we're prioritizing, again, geographic distribution in projects around the city. So we have the Salt Lake City Airport coming up, Glendale Park, 9-Line Bike Park, North Temple Underpass was just completed, and Fire Station number 3. We have a lot of projects going on right now. So future goals for that program are wide geographic distribution, looking at diversity in media and a kind of world-class art collection, and sort of streamlining, the mechanisms for that program and support for that program. Sure.
Thanks, Felicia. This is sort of a curveball, but today, Councilmember Valdemoros and I had the chance to tour the 2 new yet-to-open homeless resource centers, and we were kind of struck with the group that we were with at how stark the dorms are, the 5 rooms where people will be, where the bunks will be essentially in both of the buildings. So there's 10 dormitories, and the big white, quite tall, 2-story kind of height ceiling in those spaces made us think about the opportunity perhaps to get some mural art in there to sort of warm the space and soften it. And that is something that in the past, like when Derek brought the idea to, I think it was to the councilor, were we being the RDA, when we did, it was to the RDA for the granary mural project. He kind of like made that up in a way, and it worked really well, I think. I don't want to just shove some money in and say, let's make it happen. So I wonder if we could talk more in this budget process about how perhaps the city could help to infuse some art that works with the needs of the space, which there's a lot of, cleaning needs and sort of the room, you could almost spray it down. It's built that way on purpose. And so I'm not talking about oil paintings, but maybe more like a digital medium, or a printed medium in that way. But I wanted to insert that that's something I'm interested in talking about in this budget process. And I think that the RDA and Arts Council have done a really wonderful job recently around working with local artists to make some of those projects happen. This is a different need, but it would be a really wonderful asset to those buildings, and I think Shelter of the Homeless would be willing to work with us on that.
I'm still sort of learning about some of the structure and funding mechanisms of public art in the city, which is vastly more complicated than at the state. And I would never say no to more funding for public art, and how that happens for capital facility construction, again, is a little bit different because there's not a 1% policy across all construction and all programs. And I think what we're looking at right now is we would need to prioritize the ability to execute those projects and to maintain those projects, because right now those resources are at capacity or
Understand.
non-existent.
We can
But
have
I-
more
yes,
conversation
yeah.
in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, Felicia, may
Yeah.
I? And this is in response to what Councilmember Mendenhall said, is that this, our public art policy in the RDA is a discussion that we would like to have and would like to talk about, and we've kind of been talking about as RDA. As you know, the HRCs are in the State Street area, but we haven't quite gotten all the way through that project. But I think one of the things I hope to bring to the board as an RDA is what that public art policy might be for new construction. And so this may be somewhere where we can help engage and look at how important our public art is, and how important it is kind of to have, and this is sort of the RDA developer side of it, but have them understand that maybe there is a 1% policy. Maybe there is something that with if we're giving you money, part of that is giving back, or we're taking out 1% for public art. Or I think that's a policy discussion we can certainly have and start to kind of incorporate some of these ideas, and actually that I hope that we can have soon. So just FYI.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. And with this one, it probably doesn't work in the RDA because it's
Right.
not, we don't own the building and we don't have a project area yet. But I totally agree that we need to go back to that discussion and priority as the RDA.
This is an example of a new pilot program that we tried last year and are continuing this year. It's documentation from the Busker Fest on Regent Street. Over 70 artists were presented and 2,000 attendees in its first year. We identified sort of a gap in the community in serving the street performer and busker community, and this is sort of a goal towards working towards ordinance revisions and education about how these kind of artists can function in our community. So we're working with, similar to the Twilight model, a private entity who went through a bid process to execute this. And we hope to kind of incubate this program and send it off in the future, because we see ourselves sort of as an incubator for some programs. Future goals. I just want to talk about sort of broad goals. You know, I'm looking at, like we sort of had talked about before, including city residents in the way that we think about trees and streets and waste and the arts as a city service for all, so more inclusive demographic and geographic reach in the community, and equity and access, and a broad look at different artistic disciplines and needs that aren't being served in the community. Because what you've seen is just sort of a sampling of some of our programs in the community. You'll kind of recall that the council had allocated funding to kind of explore ways for the Arts Council to improve and help clarify some of the challenges with the foundation and the city relationship. And at the time, the department had recommended a split with the two entities, but no decisions were made. And then the board convened with the department and the city and sort of assessed pros and cons and different options for how we would operate going forward. And a few options sort of came up, one being to maintain the current model, another a split and be an independent foundation, and the other to only be a city division. And really, all the entities kind of came together and said, we don't really have enough information to formalize this decision, and we need to, you know, kind of take a step back. This was a very internal decision. We need to do some community listening. And so we kind of slowed down, asked how we could best serve the community, completed the gap analysis with that funding and, you know, with my leadership transition here, and really clarified that we want to maintain the same structure and that it's really this unprecedented model for moving forward, where we can leverage the assets of both, you know, maintaining this sort of hybrid structure that we have, and that we really need to work to kind of clarify the roles of those two and continue the work of additional stakeholder engagement, board training, organization, and human resources analysis and consulting. And so we are continuing that work to clarify some of those challenges, and we plan to finish doing that process in this calendar year, fiscal year, really, with that.
So you just hit on that policy question, I think, around the decrease in funding a little bit, which is a question about, is the Arts Council requesting or receiving stakeholder feedback?
Yeah.
And conducting research and planning. But can you talk about the question previous to that is around an update on the Arts Council separation from the foundation, and about next steps in that transition process as you go through the stakeholder feedback and
Sure.
that evaluation?
So we really have kind of decided that we're not looking at a separation, and originally it was a reorganization. And so what we are doing is continuing with union creative stakeholder engagement with the community. We're under contract with them right now to do more listening out in the community. And one of the needs that we identified was really that we had some big visibility kind of issues in the community, and needed to be more present in the community. So we're not planning for a separation process. Was there another component of that? Yeah.
Can I step in? This may be helpful context in some of the public engagement that took place. One of the things that the community came back and said, of course, was, you know, we understand the city's perspective and why it would be important to separate, but a lot of that risk was carried based off of Twilight, which that risk under the current model is removed. So the question was posed back, what is this really, what's the purpose if that problem in large part has been solved? And so that was part of the formulation and the decision making. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a large component of it.
Sure.
So just one thing I wanted to highlight.
And other parts of that process with the consultation is looking at, board development, training our board to clarify the role between the city and the foundation, looking at redrafting our bylaws with consultation, and then coming back to the city and making sure they're in alignment with city ordinance. Because we're not planning for a separation, we're looking at new fundraising strategies that we haven't employed before. We're happy to report that we've seen a couple funders come back to Twilight because they're really excited about it. We've exceeded our fundraising goals for the Living Traditions Festival this year, and we have other sources of funding outside of the city, which are from the state and the county and private foundations. So we see a lot of other community support, and we, the city is our largest support of or source of funding, but we're hoping for that holistic support of all of our programs as well.
So that's good to hear. And when do you anticipate that you might come back to, when you say come back to the city for clarification on your board process of making those distinctions? Is that something that would come to the council?
But would it come to the council?
I think we can come back and brief you on it. I think at this juncture, we're not really sure it's a policy question.
No, I think appreciating a briefing is,
Yeah.
I feel like
Yes.
what's happening, this is just Aaron, I'm not sure what the rest of the body feels like, but that we went through some pretty dramatic chasm creation.
Totally.
Yeah.
With years of Twilight and sort of a lack of clarity, and that we're knitting this thing back together.
Yeah.
And that kind of sharing of your process of distinguishing
Totally.
and cleaning up the house, really, that kind of sharing really brings us closer to, it brings
Absolutely.
me closer to feeling security in the future of the Arts Council.
Agreed, and we would love to do that.
That's a priority, and we're looking at, by the end of June, having some assessment from a consultant done about the best direction to go with that. We have drafts in progress with our board, and when we understand what that process might look like, we're absolutely going to involve stakeholders in clarifying that, and we feel on a really good path to, now that we have leadership at our organization, we feel like our board has a better understanding of the relationship between the two entities, which has a lot to do with board education that we're working hard on and have made a lot of headway on. So,
Question after.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. This is off of the Arts Council, but thank you, because I appreciate the same thing of understanding these two entities. I was asking about it earlier, but Ben, I noticed, Ben and Laura. Oh, I thought you said Amy. Sorry. It's Anna. I noticed in the budget that there wasn't any proposal for additional FTEs, and I know you guys are doing a ton of work. I know that by doing all of this work, we've increased that score from a negative 25 up by a lot of points in 2 years, almost 3 years. I know that we are looking at this accreditation with the International Department, whatever, of Economic Development something, which is awesome. And I learned yesterday we'd be one of 65 economic development departments in the country that would have this accreditation out of, 5,000? I mean, it's huge. And that is because of the amount of work that all of you are doing, and probably the overtime and the sleepless nights, and then the UN and all of these events that are happening. So I'm curious, I say all of this to not just praise you, but to say, are you fully staffed right now? Do you have the funding to be fully staffed? If you're not, and how many more reasonable people would you, not reasonable people, reasonably how many more people would you need to continue doing this work at the pace you're doing it, so that we don't have burnout and turnover, and that we can keep moving with such momentum.
Thank you. So I'm really proud of our team. And you're right, we do work sort of relentlessly to be able to achieve all of the goals that we've set forth. In terms of additional staff, you know, we would never turn down additional hands to help us with our mission. There is definitely challenges when somebody goes out on leave, either, you know, parental leave, or due to a medical issue, and you know, we just don't have a deep bench to pick up that work. The other challenge that we're seeing is, as we are continuing to grow our international brand, Ben is wearing multiple hats, and so we really don't have a dedicated international person. And so I think there are opportunities. We didn't ask for it in this budget because we knew that, as is true in most cities across the country, our budgets are difficult. And so we wanted to be very modest in our requests. And we felt that this year the importance was really on continuing to build the arts programming, and continuing to work on our research capabilities and building out those industry sectors of aerospace, life science, and technology.
So you did mention those three areas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that would mean to me, if those are areas we're going to focus on, that they are probably needing to go outside of Utah to focus on those areas. Is that accurate or no?
You know, I think the answer to that is in part yes. There are companies that we would love to see locate here in Utah. That being said, we also have a large contingent of these businesses in our community, and retention is always is less expensive than new. It's like any good marketing plan, right? And so we want to build off of the assets we have, continue to grow our existing business base, while being mindful that the only way we can continue to grow is also to bring in new companies.
Okay,
Questions or comments from the council? Anna? Or Councilmember Valdemoros, sorry.
No problem. So when we're trying to recruit, and I know we have some funds or some sort of incentives for these companies to relocate here or open here, are you guys looking at additional funds for any of those companies that you're trying to, you know, have them here in Salt Lake?
So our financial tools are really sort of found in two buckets. One is over in community and neighborhoods, which is our economic development loan fund. So loans up to $350,000, and for a term of 6 years, around 6% interest, 7 years. The other tools are our redevelopment agency tools, and those tools are really geared towards, I would say, larger projects. So things like single parcel CRA, our loan program, our affordable housing funds, and not really geared towards the small businesses. So we really do lean on our partners at community and neighborhoods and their EDLF.
All right.
But there isn't any other tools in our toolbox in terms of just capital that we can help invest into companies.
And are you going to look at that at some point, or is that part of your plans in the future, in a year, 2 years, or?
Yeah. You know, I think right now we've been pretty successful using the tools that we have in the city. We are hearing some concerns from some of our local businesses that need to do things like tenant improvement that are not in an RDA project area, that would like to see that lending limit of $350 bump up, because they are having a challenge with local banks providing them the capital to do that tenant improvement. And not all landlords are as wonderful as Councilmember Rogers in providing a good tenant improvement. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we have the tools to meet our business community. I'm not quite ready to make those asks until I think we have a little bit more data.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you all for your presentation.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Now, Councilmember Mendenhall, we're ready for a break. But as much as I love all of you and love spending time with each of you, we are scheduled here for a 40-minute break. Let's come back at. No, let's do 6:15. We do have dinner, but it's portable, so let's plan on coming back at 6:15 so that we can get home to families tonight. sort of short break, sort of not so short. The next item on our agenda is also part of our budget discussion. The Metropolitan Water District will be presenting their issue. Sam Owen from the council office will introduce this topic, and then Mike DeVry, general manager, as well as Tom Godfrey from the board will be there, and I think we have another board member as well.
We actually have two other board
Two other board members, okay. So I'll let you introduce them. Okay, Sam.
Mr. Chair, thanks. The Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy conveys water to the customers of Salt Lake City Public Utilities and to Sandy City as well from the Central Utah Project and the Provo River system. This year there is a small 2% rate decrease from the district for Salt Lake City customers. Aside from that, the budget's pretty similar to last year. So with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
So my name is Mike DeVries. I'm the general manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. Thank you, Chair and council members, for allowing us to present today. We appreciate that. So in the way of introductions, so Tom Godfrey is not only the Metro Chair, but he is also the president of the Provo River Water Users Association as well. And so appreciate him being here. We have Don Milne, who is also a trustee for the Metro Water District, and he serves also as our vice chair for the Water District. Also, we have Cindy Cromer, one of our trustees in attendance. Appreciate her being here. And Annalee Muncy is my assistant general manager, so appreciate everything she does. Appreciate her being here as well. And then also Jesse Stewart with Salt Lake City Public Utilities. Appreciate our working relationship with public utilities. So he and Laura just do an outstanding job serving the public. So with that, so as I go through the presentation, don't hesitate to interrupt or interject with questions. I want to be sensitive to your time, so just let me know if I'm going too long or if we need to change up what we're doing. So can you hear me okay? So, all right, so get right into it. Just a quick background for most of you may be aware of this, but in the way of introduction, the district was established in 1935, and our member cities are Salt Lake City and Sandy City, as was mentioned by Sam earlier. 5 board members are appointed by Salt Lake City, 2 board members are appointed by Sandy City, and they serve 4-year terms. Our customers also, as Sam mentioned, Salt Lake City and Sandy City are the primary, again, the member cities, the primary customers of our drinking water supply. We're a wholesaler. But also we have surplus customers that we sell water to, so Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District and some irrigators and sometimes others will go into surplus contracts when it makes sense and in a way that will not create any concerns for Salt Lake City or Sandy City water supply. They're always paramount in the scheme of priority. And anytime we can get surplus sales, it helps offset some of the costs for our member cities.
Can I ask
yes.
or have you follow up on that just a little bit? Because that is a question that I hear somewhat regularly about. If Salt Lake City, just because of the watershed that we have, and then the partnership that we have with Sandy on Metro Water, I get questions about people asking about surplus water contracts and whether or not we may end up getting ourselves into a position where we've signed surplus contracts with other municipalities, other groups. What happens in the case of a drought or in the case of something where we're having to roll some of that back?
Right.
You mentioned that the Salt Lake City and Sandy, of course, for Metro are going to be paramount. But how are those contracts handled?
So those contracts are handled typically on a year-to-year basis most of the time, just based on what's available. In the event that there are supply issues, then the contracts are developed such that we're able to withhold or not deliver water in those years that there is a supply concern for the member cities. So that's how that works. And one of the conditions that we want to always look at carefully with any of the entities that we're developing these contracts with is to make sure that they're not building their communities on this supply, so that they have other means to be able to cover that supply in the event that we can't provide it. So yeah, that's part of the thinking behind it. So does that answer the
Yeah,
question?
because I mean, and it's really, the questions come around that point.
Right.
You know, are there other cities that are building out their residential populations or their business populations without having the resources to manage that
Right.
effectively? And are we, in essence, helping with sprawl, helping with
Right.
all this
Are
other
we?
stuff?
Yeah. Are we a catalyst to that problem? And the answer is no. We're careful with how we set up those contracts.
Great. Thank you.
So, yep. Okay, so this is just a summary or a map, rather, that shows the service area. So Sandy City and Salt Lake City service areas, of course, extend beyond their incorporated boundaries, as you can see there, primarily across the northern end of the valley and the eastern side of the valley as well. The green area to the southwest of the highlighted yellowish color, it would be primarily supplied by Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, as a side note. Our water sources, so the Provo River project is our primary water source at 61,900 acre feet in a given year for a full allocation. Little Cottonwood Creek, typically the yield is about 20,000 acre feet, and so that's a combination of water rights that are actually owned by Salt Lake City and Sandy City. We're treating on their behalf. Central Utah project, this is the M&I, or the municipal and industrial portion, and that's 20,000 acre feet. And that's a pretty steady number. It's a take or pay, so we use that entire amount on an annual basis. Ontario Drain Tunnel, this is a Sandy preferential right, as it's noted there, and that typically yields about 3,200 acre feet. So the total currently is about 105,000 acre feet per year. And then you'll note at the bottom there, the Central Utah project, Utah Lake System, has yet to be provided to Metro through the block noticing process, and that will take place likely in 2021. There's a deferral option by both member cities, and they're likely going to exercise that deferral option based on feedback we've received at this point. And the deferral can be anywhere from 1 to 10 years, and each member city can defer any amount of that time period. So, any questions on the supply before I move on? So. Just really quickly, tying to the supply, it's important, I think, to understand the relationships with these entities. So the Provo River project is managed by the Provo River Water Users Association, the Deer Creek Division, part of the Provo River project that was developed back in the early 30s. And then Metropolitan Water District, MWDSLS, is the aqueduct division side of that, Salt Lake Aqueduct being the component or the delivery facility that brings the water from Deer Creek to the Salt Lake Valley. The shareholders of the Provo River Water Users Association, Metro is a primary shareholder of 61.9%. There are other shareholders as well. The company, as I've noted there, is 16%, who primarily is held by Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District as far as shareholdership. Central Utah project is managed by the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, and Metro has the two petitions, one for the M&I, which is 20,000 acre feet, as I mentioned a minute ago, and then 5,600 acre feet forthcoming with the ULS water. Some of our key facilities, I think this is good to be aware of some of the facilities and systems that Metro relies on. Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant, recently upgraded in 2007, is 150 million gallons per day capacity. This is located in Cottonwood Heights. Pointed Mountain Water Treatment Plant, located in the Draper area, has a capacity of 70 million gallons per day, and that was constructed in 2007. So, and these were both part of a capacity improvement project known as Metro Water Project, and I've shared this with some of the council members in the past, so that may ring true to some of you. Salt Lake Aqueduct, as I mentioned earlier, is a key conveyance facility of water supply from Deer Creek, 42 miles long, so we have a lot of encroachment and right-of-way activity that we have to manage along that corridor. It's a 69-inch diameter pipe, completed in 1951. It's in good condition right now, but we're looking at potential replacement in the maybe 2035 to 2040 time frame, and so we're planning for and looking toward that with our capital improvement planning. Design capacity of 113 million gallons, as I've noted there, per day. Point of the Mountain Aqueduct, also part of the Metro Water Project, connects the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant with the Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant, allows us to convey drinking water between the two plants, either direction, so we can send it north. We can pump it north from the Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant to supplement deliveries during the high flow seasons of the summer, or we can provide the water to the south. And we also have a connection to the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, Jordan Aqueduct Systems that we share with them that is at the Pointed Mountain Water Treatment Plant as well. So we've got an interconnect to the west side of the valley as well, which is a very beneficial redundant connection of water systems. Terminal Reservoir, you may be aware that, so this is I-215 and about 3300 south. Recently completed construction on refurbishing or replacing those reservoirs. The capacity of that, the design capacity is 48 million gallons. And so this is a very helpful and a very important supply system for Salt Lake City, both fire safety supply as well as peaking demand supply. Jordan Aqueduct System, I just alluded to this just a second ago, but so Metro owns 2/7 of the Jordan Aqueduct and related facilities, which includes a terminal reservoir on the Jordan Aqueduct System as well, and also the Jordan Valley Water Treatment Plant. We have a 2/7 ownership interest in that as well. Now, and maybe one other note on this, the importance of this to Salt Lake City in particular is this is a key supply artery to the northwest quadrant, the northwest area of Salt Lake City's distribution system. So, budget revenues, so getting into the budget now. So just to kind of help you understand how revenue is projected and planned in our budget, 98% of our revenue is really from three primary sources. So we have water sales at about 49%, property taxes is at 23%, and capital assessments at about 26%. Capital assessments, primarily tying back to the Metro Water project that I alluded to a minute ago, that's not likely going to be increasing much, if at all, anytime soon. So that's going to be a pretty static number. Property taxes, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but we're just letting that, the certified rate erode. We're not doing anything to increase that. And as you can see, it's not the primary source of our revenue. So anyway, it gives us some flexibility if we ever do need to exercise a 0005, which is the highest amount we can exercise as far as the assessment, to be able to have another resource, if you will, if that were needed. So miscellaneous revenue at about 2%, and you can see what I've noted there, interest and other related revenues. So we're proposing, as also Sam mentioned, a rate adjustment. So maybe just really quickly, a rates history relating to the Metro Water District. So historically, before 2010, we sold water using a volumetric rate, meaning per acre foot. And then we, from 2010 to 2013, adjusted that to where we were selling using a seasonal rate. And the intent was to try to encourage conjunctive use, to hopefully encourage member cities to use surface water supply when it's available and save the groundwater supply and be able to kind of save that as a reserve for emergency purposes. And it kind of worked a little bit, but what we found is we had a revenue shortfall when we actually looked at what was happening with the revenues. So we went back to volumetric beginning in 2014, and then in 2017, working with the member cities, Sandy and Salt Lake City, with some extensive deliberation and discussion and analysis, decided that a fixed rate would actually be beneficial and work to the best interest of both member cities. So, and as I've noted here, it supports conjunctive use because member cities are using water, the surface water, when it's available, and they're not worried about the volumetric rate. So it's basically they pay their fixed amount and they can use as much as they need to use. And then on top of that, there's a predictability from a budgetary standpoint for both Metro as well as the member cities. They can look at their budgets and say, okay, we know we can budget this amount and we can stick to that. So just really quickly, just a few graphs to kind of show how that has played out over the years as far as how member cities have utilized their proportionate amount of water. This is in acre feet. The dark blue is Sandy City. The green is Salt Lake City. And to kind of zoom in to help kind of see what that means. And again, noting that in 2017 is when we went to the fixed rate, you'll note that Sandy City increased their usage by quite a bit once we went to the fixed rate, as expected. You know, it was kind of what we were fully expecting. And then if you look at it from a percentage standpoint, kind of a similar trend as you would expect. the way the fixed rate works is we charge a proportionate amount to each member city for the fixed rate charge. Because Sandy City, and we look at this from a period of record standpoint. So we look at all the way back to 1996 is a period of record that we have as far as water sales that we feel solid about. And the reason being is that way, as one member city decides to use more water a given year, it doesn't adversely impact them financially the next year. So there's a buffer, if you will, since we're looking at it from a period of record. So the current fiscal year, the proportionate allocation is 27%, 73%, as noted in this pie chart. And based on Sandy City's trend since 2017 with their increased usage, but again, looking at that whole period of record, that has nudged them up to 28%, and Salt Lake City has dropped down to 72%. And so with that adjustment, that's where this 2% decrease for Salt Lake City comes into play and the 3% increase for Sandy City. So,
quick question
Yes.
on that note.
Yes.
Councilmember.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Mr.
No, that's
Chair.
fine. That's great.
So on the period of record, do you have any plan to put a cap on that? Are you going to keep going since 1996? Because that, at some point, it doesn't necessarily account for the proportional use if you let
it get too
rate-
long.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a really good question, and I think the answer right now is we're going to continue to, we meet monthly with our member cities, with Sandy City, Salt Lake City Public Utilities staff, and the intent would be to continue to discuss this and dialogue this with them and see what makes sense as far as in their minds, because you're right. I mean, if it's too extended, then to some degree, it needs to be reactive, right? It can't be too dampened. If it's too long or too lengthy, then it becomes problematic potentially. If it's too short, there's kind of the other end of that spectrum as well. You know, if Salt Lake City, for example, suddenly bumps up their use one year, we don't want to have Salt Lake City suddenly have an impact of that proportionate adjustment impacting negatively them as well. So what is reasonable is kind of the question,
I think
right?
23 years is too long.
Okay.
That's my opinion, and
Okay.
that's my opinion from a Department of Environmental Quality standpoint, and working on a board there and looking at what even the EPA, which is a different subject. I'm not on the water board, but the times that we are asked to calculate into and then pull an average from are no more than 10 years. And so I'm just wondering from a best practice standpoint what other water districts around the country do for pulling that average where they have a shared system like this. And then I'm interested also rhetorically right now about the growth rates of the two cities. I know that in your previous slides you look at the historic use, and we see Sandy growing since 2014. And Salt Lake City remaining or decreasing somewhat. So anyway, I'm curious about shortening that period of reference.
Right. No, that's a really good question. We can look into that one some more, and like I say, we'll be dialoguing that with the member city public utility staff as well, but we'll do that research as well.
Would that be an administrative change that you would make, or would it be a change that the board
That'd be a recommendation that I would make and the board would approve.
Okay.
So ultimately, the budget is theirs to approve and adopt, so yes.
Okay, and so I'll hold off, but at some point, Sam's second policy question, which is about Sandy City board members, we could
Okay.
get
Yeah,
there.
that's a good question as well.
Okay.
So,
Thank
yeah,
you.
whenever you'd like to dialogue that, we can talk about that as well. So, okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So we've already noted some of this, but overall, that adjustment that we just talked about, and then looking at other charges, other rates, we're also planning a 3% rate increase for all non-member entity water sales. So that would be to, Jordan Valley is a good example, or any of the irrigation sales that we do, raw water sales. We're not proposing a certified tax rate increase, as we mentioned, and our capital assessments will remain static as well. Just a quick summary on operations and maintenance. So We have, because of increased volumes, we've had a little bit of an increase in chemical expenses, rather. And with the chemical expenses, one of the things that we've been doing we've always gone through a competitive process, but we've been trying to work through different approaches with competitive process to help minimize increased costs on the chemicals. And so that's one of the things that we're continuing to look at. We're also looking at opportunities with other entities, teaming up with other entities, water districts and others, to see if there might be an opportunity for economy of scale benefit to find some additional savings. So that's another thing we're looking at. Power costs, we have a really good story on this one. We're actually saving quite a bit. We've been a part of what is known as a strategic energy management cohort. And with our involvement, we've been looking at, in part of that analysis, so there's a third-party consultant that was hired by Rocky Mountain Power to help out with this process, and there are multiple entities involved. I think Sandy City is one of the members, and Kearns Improvement District, and a few others. But anyway, our participation has amounted to savings, as I've noted here, of about 2.4 million kilowatt hours, and which translates to about more than $120,000 in savings in power costs. So good story to tell in some savings that we've been able to accomplish there. Part of our O&M expenses are last few years been really impacted by the Central Utah Water Conservancy District O&M, and not just operations and maintenance, but also a replacement reserve that they're assessing the Metro Water District. And this relates to the M&I, or the Municipal and Industrial 20,000 acre feet of the Central Utah project. As I've noted here, for the proposed budget FY 2020, it's a 33% increase, next year 25%, $200,000 per year. And then over the course of basically 4 years, it's been about a 233% increase, or $700,000. So we've gone from $300,000 in 2017 to over $1 million for the projected FY 2021 costs, and they're likely going to continue beyond that. And I don't know the projections yet beyond that, so I didn't dare estimate. I've got projections in our cash flow, but Central Utah will likely be sharing more information on this. But the challenge that Metro has here is we do not have any governance control on that board. So that's one of the challenges that we've had to deal with. We have met with their staff, shared some concerns with these costs, and we've encouraged them to try to stretch out the costs. If there really is that need, can we have it over the course of more years? Can it be more like a decade or beyond? And the answer that they gave us was no. So anyway, this is $3.8 million total when you add in the capital for our budget. So it's a big chunk of our budget, and not necessarily the largest supply of our water. So Provo River Water Users Association. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to kind of share a couple of additional components relating to the budget. One of the things that is a concern relating to the Provo Association is, so Deer Creek Dam is one of the key components of the Provo River project that they operate on our behalf and the other shareholders in that association. And there is a concern that the dam intake is at risk of not being able to function, because it dates all the way back to the original construction of the dam. And there's a problem with, a potential problem if quagga mussel infestations happen or something like that, being there's only one level for that intake to function. If that is plugged up, or if there's a problem with also some guard gates that allow water to come through the intake, we could basically not be able to get the water that we need, not only for the Provo River project, but also Central Utah project, because that flows through Deer Creek as well. So there's a big concern about the need to give that some attention. Did you have a question?
Your
Councilmember
statement
Rogers?
kind of piqued my interest to know about the quagga zebra mussels.
Yes.
Do we have any of those in our current water facilities?
We don't. There was a Belliger, like an infant quagga mussel that was identified a few years back. And so Deer Creek was a suspect body for a while. But all the recent tests, and there's a certain period of time when if they have negative testing for a certain period of time, then it becomes a clear body again, and that's where it is right now. So yeah, we don't have that. However, trends show that a lot of folks that are boating at Lake Powell tend to come up to Deer Creek, and so that's one of the concerns we have is making sure that we don't have that infestation make its way from Lake Powell, which is very infested at this point. So, yeah. So, to take care of replacing that intake and the guard gates that I was referencing, we're looking at some additional costs to the Metro Water District. We'd be looking at a capital, and this would be something that we've already programmed into our cash flow, but some additional capital costs, as I've noted there. This would not be an additional capital assessment to the member cities. It's something we've already been planning and programming in, but something that we're looking at and carefully wanting to support with the Provo Association. And there should be other participants in this from a cost standpoint. As I've noted, Central Utah should be one of those, and Reclamation should be another one. And so we'll be carefully working on the financing side of that as well. So just what I've noted, second bullet item from the bottom. So historical averages, we have the primary, because we're the primary shareholder of this association, we have the majority vote as far as the board members. And so I feel the governance is really good there. And as you can see, the annual increases are pretty reasonable. The total cost for the Provo Association is about $3.3 million on our budget. On our capital, we're looking at about a 1.5% increase. So a couple things. So total budget for capital, $6.4 million, as I've noted, a decrease of about $310,000, and that's primarily related to the terminal reservoir recently being completed, the construction. Also an increase of about $405,000 relating to Jordan Aqueduct System capital expenditures, primarily with the Jordan Valley Water Treatment Plant, some updates to their water treatment facilities, the filtration systems, and things of that nature. So we have a comprehensive asset management program and capital improvement plan. And as I've noted here, we conduct routine inspections and analyze condition and criticality and prioritize capital needs. And our capital improvement plan is actually programmed all the way out through FY 2072. Now, is it super accurate that far out? No, not necessarily, but the point is we're really careful to look at all of our facilities and prioritize the needs for many decades out. So, debt service. So, switching gears just a little bit, Metro recently refunded a portion of our 2012 A bonds, as I've noted here. We were able to accomplish a net present value savings of about $2.3 million. So, something that is beneficial for the public that we serve through Sandy and Salt Lake City, and then also a cash flow savings of about $168,000 annually. We'll continue to look for additional refunding opportunities. Given the way the economy looks right now, not sure if any will pop up, but we'll continue to watch carefully for those. We are not planning to incur any additional debt. We're trying to pay down the debt we have right now, which is about $222 million in principal right now. And then our budget schedule. So our tentative budget was adopted, as noted here, on the 15th of April. And then we'll have our budget hearing for our rate increases that are proposed on the 20th of May, so next Monday at 6 p.m. And then we'll also have the final budget considered for adoption on June 17th. So, and I love this picture. This is a project, this was our automation and controls project, and this guy just looks totally baffled, so, as I would be as well. Yeah, so, questions? What's that? That's a real picture. Yes, it is.
That's sad.
That's part of a project.
Councilmember Mendenhall, do you want to go to your question? Because I remembered.
Thanks. I actually am not going to ask about the board. I'll let somebody else ask
Never
that
mind.
question. No, I got
next, I'm kidding.
I want to ask about the sort of broader water conversation in the valley about the Bear River diversion project. And I wanted to know how Metro sees itself as a steward of this, a great deal of this resource in the valley, and how you see yourselves in terms of that, the potential impacts of that kind of a project on not necessarily Metro District, but on Salt Lake City, and the impacts, the health impacts, the environmental impacts that that might incur.
Yeah, so the Bear River project is obviously very controversial for a lot of folks. And from Metro's perspective, looking at Salt Lake City's interests specifically, One of the concerns I think that we see on behalf of Salt Lake City is a governance concern. With that water coming in, it's something that, yes, we do have some element of governance with the Jordan Aqueduct system, but if the Bear River project were to come into that Jordan Aqueduct system, we would not be able to have any governance or say over that water as it's coming in. So there's a concern as far as governance relating to that supply. And then there's also a concern from just a water quality standpoint, because we don't have governance involvement with that, and just making sure that the quality meets the standards that we've established with the Jordan Aqueduct system and the Provo River project supplies and Central Utah project supplies that we've been providing to Salt Lake City. So there's kind of those two aspects, and one of the things that Metro is trying to do, it kind of comes back to this surplus water supply discussion that we had earlier. But when and where it makes sense, when we do have available water, if we can help Jordan Valley with some of those supplies, that can maybe defer or maybe postpone their consideration of the Bear River or the Bear Lake project or Bear River project. So that's one that, yeah, I think from Salt Lake City's standpoint, I think there are several concerns, and just a couple of them that come to mind on that. So I don't know if that.
The first two I hadn't thought of. The second one, so I appreciate you sharing that. But I think that the probable depletion of Great Salt Lake as a result of that diversion creates a huge environmental concern for James Rogers District and the downtown area. From an air quality perspective, again, that Rose Park monitor is our highest monitor.
Right.
It's the reason we're in serious non-attainment.
Sure.
And if we have that kind of dust creation, that would be a likely outcome of the depleted flow into that lake. We have big problems as a city.
I agree.
And so I'm just wondering how Metro relates to those broader conversations.
Yeah, and so the Great Salt Lake, the health of the Great Salt Lake obviously is essential to air quality, but it's also essential to the watershed.
Right.
It plays a key role in water supply in the Wasatch Front here. And so, it's definitely a concern for Metro. We don't really have a say in the Bear River project per se, but we do, from our perspective, want to do anything we can to help mitigate those types of concerns that come along with that in any way that we reasonably can. And one of those is hopefully helping defer those types of projects by offering supply to Jordan Valley when and if it makes sense. So.
Well, I'll tell you, from this council member, I would be wholly supportive of any exploration. You have that relationship with Jordan Valley, obviously, in many regards, from a governance relationship, ownership relationship, but as water districts. And so whatever kind of enhanced collaboration and communication that these water districts can have about the realities of their supply, the realities of all of our conservation efforts, and their projected needs, all of those aspects, I think, as there's so few water districts in this valley, it makes sense that the conversation should be happening around a project that would impact our residents so greatly.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for the good work that you do. Thank you for your board as well. You guys are all very engaged, and we appreciate that, and just keep our water clean.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks. Okay, we have one more item tonight. Okay, so this is the Funding Our Future overview. Ben Ludke is going to lead this, as well as Kira. Both of them are going to get us through this one. There is one point before you jump in, and on the staff report there are a number of questions to go through, some policy questions. And what I'd like to do, just because the Funding Our Future piece is, this is really the first year that we've had the budget to go over like this. And so what I'd like to do, instead of having them go over that right now, but if we could work with the administration to have the administration answer the questions in the policy document just on on the funding our future piece. That way we'll be able to get through what we want to talk about. David, does that work? If we can do, okay. Okay, Ben and Kara.
All right, I'll go ahead and jump in and orient us. So, funding our future, just for anyone who hasn't been following along before, in 2018, Salt Lake City identified some one-time and ongoing needs in critical areas of street maintenance, affordable housing, transit, and public safety. So there was a lot of discussion last year of funding options for those critical needs, one of which was a 0.5% sales tax increase. So we're going to review the outcomes of last year's budget discussions, take a brief glance at this year's allocations, and then open it up for discussion of policy questions. This briefing is kind of focused more on the broader framework, policies, and intents governing funding our future. If any questions come up relating to any specific critical needs, staff will be taking notes to make sure that those are discussed in each department's respective budget briefing. So to start off, last year, all right, there's our pretty pie chart of last year's overview. Housing was allocated $4.2 million. Public safety got $5.9 million. Streets and infrastructure got $3.1 million. Transit, $5.3 million. And then CIP had an allocation of $3.75 million with $2.5 million allocation for fund balance. That was a total of $25 million for a partial year of sales tax collection. During the council's budget discussions, they came up with several types of contingencies that were included in adoptions. First, the council has conditional appropriations, which provide clarification on under which conditions the funds could be spent. Those were using funds specifically for those 4 critical needs and only for those 4 critical needs. The council asked that any proposed adjustments be brought back to the council for review. One stipulation was that a publicly available dashboard be maintained so that the public can see and track expenses and projects that are funded. For any new positions funded with the sales tax money, establish an annual review period. Include interlocal agreements for any funds and contracts with outside agencies, and providing quarterly updates on the sales tax revenue. The council also included some contingent appropriations in their adoption, which are conditions that must be met before funds can be released. One of those was $80,000 for the census coordinator, which relies on working with the Gardner Policy Institute to make sure that the earliest tasks for the census can be identified to get the most accurate count possible. Another was the interlocal agreement with UTA for transit funding, which was accomplished earlier this year. Finally, the council also adopted some legislative intents related to funding our future, and these are additional insights into the council's intentions for funding appropriations. One of those...
I know we're not doing policy questions, but I did want to ask, if I may, to the administrative staff, as Mr. Chair pointed out, there's these policy questions, and we're hoping that just to make this process go quicker, which I appreciate, thank you, having the administrative staff answer some of these questions. But as it relates to the legislative intents, I saw that they were put in the budget book and sort of the responses in the budget book. However, there are some legislative intents that there is no response to. So I would be asking administration that on those that there is no response to, could we maybe have a response? Because even in the budget book, it says there's no response to them. So if I could just request that maybe the administration can go through those, and those without a response, we can get a response to, so we can have a constructive dialogue around that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. One of those intents was the completion of a housing program outcomes report, which was supposed to inform this year's allocations. Another one was that the definition of public safety be broadened to include multiple departments in addition to police. The other was that the biennial survey of citizen or resident satisfaction informed the administration's considerations of the allocations for this year. So that's the very short summary of the outcomes of the council's discussions from last year's budget. Moving along to a brief overview just of the allocations and how they're proportionate this year. We're looking at $5.2 million allocated for housing, $13 million allocated for public safety, $2.7 for streets and infrastructure, $7.7 for transit, $4.78 million for CIP, $900,000 for fund balance, which brings us to a total of $34,542,000. The numbers in the staff report are slightly different because the tables included in the budget book included planners that were originally included in the infrastructure category, but in the council's discussions last year, they moved one of those planners to housing and one of those planners to transportation. So there's a slight change from the original staff report that was sent out. And that brings us to the broad overview of the policy questions.
Kira,
yes.
So on that last point, so there were 2 positions that were funded with this revenue, and those positions have since been moved. Is that right?
They were in the budget book. It looks like they're included in the streets and infrastructure category, and so we're since updating our allocations to the respective categories to reflect that one is in housing and one is in transportation.
Okay.
So as far as staff is aware at present, those positions are still receiving funding.
Okay, thank you.
So the policy questions start at the broadest level and kind of focus on trying to capture the council's intentions from previous year's discussion and see if that's the direction that we'd like to continue to go. I don't know if you'd like to walk through them one by one.
You know, I think at this point I would say no. Let's get the written response. We'll be talking about this over the next couple of weeks. So I think if we could get those answers by next week, just the reason that I think this is going to be important for this item more than any other one is because we're talking about a funding stream that is new. We haven't gone through a full budget. I mean, this is our first full budget cycle that where we've seen how it works. And so having that information, I think, is going to be critical to whatever decisions we make for this coming budget cycle, just to make sure that we're reading the tea leaves correctly. So I'd say let's not even go through it. Let's we can see if we have questions, but as far as the policy stuff, let's wait and get that from the administration by next week. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So, questions about funding our future. I know that there were some items that were discussed today that I want to come back to. The first was a question about the definition of public safety and whether or not we're expanding that definition. I think what we did in intent language last year was expand the definition, but we're not seeing the source expanding, and so that's something that we'll want to take into consideration. What are some other things that jumped out to any of you?
And if I may.
Councilmember Fowler.
Since we have some of the department people here, one of the things that when we were kind of doing an overview, I noticed is that, and Mr. Chair, you brought this up a little bit earlier, that there are 3 new positions, 3 FTEs proposed for engineering, I believe, and streets. And I understand that it takes people to do jobs that we need done. So I am putting you on notice out there that I'm going to be asking this question. So if you can connect the dots for me of the work that they're going to do, because I do know, as Mr. Chair brought up earlier, that one of our intents that I believe I remember is that with this money, we didn't want to fund necessarily fund employees. We wanted it to go to the projects themselves. So that was one of the legislative intents.
Yeah.
Again, I understand it takes people to do work. So if you'll make sure to be able to connect those dots for me, then that will be helpful information for me.
Yep. Thank you. Councilmember Wharton.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm really interested in hearing more about the park safety and using police officers as rangers and sort of how that program is being planned out, because I was sort of surprised to hear in one of our budget meetings that it's going to be part of the police department instead of part of the parks department, and I would like to know, why that's the decision and how that's going to influence the park rangers. Are they going to be armed, for example? So I'll be interested to hear a lot about that. Lots of detail, please.
Okay.
Also, just I would also like to know more. This is, I think, a question for all of us, but the housing working group, the policy question about that. And could that be used to help us move forward, because we've only had one meeting? So.
Okay. Cindy.
Okay.
There was a delay in setting those meetings. The administration was able to get the contract with the facilitator signed not last Friday, but the Friday before. And today we just heard from that facilitator to begin to set up meetings with the working group. Individual interviews first is a technique that sometimes is used and that we had suggested. So you should be hearing the next day or so about those interviews, and then after that, the meeting will be scheduled by our office.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks. As a follow-up to Councilmember Wharton's interest in the public safety park ranger discussion, I think some of us raised these in the small group budget previews, but I want us to I have some opinions, and I know that the community, through a big survey that they did last year, has opinions about the sort of look and feel of those rangers and whether or not they're in police fatigues or if they're dressed more park-like. And that was a big conversation from the Central City, Liberty Park, and East Liberty Park community councils, as they had almost a 500-person survey that they conducted about a year ago, and the mayor's administration, I think, had Dita Seed actually on contract to work with that community. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, there was a lot of community work done around the park ranger concept, and a lot of the outcome from those 3 community councils that participated in that had to do with the look and feel of those rangers, how they're dressed mattered to the community and communicated something about what their intent was in the parks. So I want us to have that kind of a conversation when we, whether it's in the PD budget or if it's in the Funding Our Future conversation. I think there's a lot there for us to talk about as a council and unpack with the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Other questions? Councilmember Valdemoros.
I just looking at the housing one, there's a lot of items here. And so I have in my notes that we will have an opportunity to hear from HAND maybe next week. Is that correct?
The Community and Neighborhoods Department is scheduled for next Tuesday, which includes the HAND division.
Okay, because yeah, a lot of this, some of them are here in the budget book, but not all of them. For example, the incentivized rent assistance program, build a more equitable city, shared housing opportunities. So I would like to know what all of that means in detail.
So not just a description, but you'd like kind of a paragraph describing what each of those programs would do, what the goals of it are?
Yes, that would be very nice. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Another question for another, maybe for when Can is with us, and I've already asked the question, so you can think about it and come back. But on that, I have a couple questions. So the incentivized rental assistance program, I want to know who it might go to potentially. Is it complementary to the rapid rehousing dollars that CAP uses in the diversion program? And then for the landlord insurance pilot, I know that there was some similar state funding that has been recently dramatically decreased from about 500,000 to 50,000 based on lack of utilization. So I'm wondering what Salt Lake evidence we have that this request is based upon. That's $350,000. And then I'd like some more information on the Building a More Equitable City, $300,000. What exactly that's going to? Is it for attorneys in the court system for evictions, or what is that money exactly going to? So that would be helpful for me. And now, Mr. Chair, I think that's all. Thank you.
So a question about fleet. With some of the changes and the recommendation that's in there for police vehicles, and having that previous discussion about ongoing cost, and that is something that we're going to see. Are we going to see that expanded to other areas of funding our future? Or is that going to be held solely under public safety? So that would be a question to find out. Other questions or comments? Okay, so once we have the answers to the policy questions, we'll be able to get through a lot of this. I want to thank all of you for this is a pretty intense process. It's intense for us, having to sit through it. It's intense for the administrative staff who are presenting and putting all the information together. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. This is arguably the most important thing that we do as a council. So I just want to thank everyone's involvement. There's a lot of reading this time of year. Keep it up. And with that, if we don't have any other questions or comments about this piece, I will look to our executive director for a report and announcements. Oh, and she doesn't even have any, so it looks like someone wants to get out of here early as well. And I do not have a report from the chair. Mr. Vice Chair, do you have anything?
Always.
Okay, so with that, we will move on. And I just want to thank all of you for time and attention.
Thanks,
and we're adjourned.
Good job.